Some men are born fathers. Others have fatherhood thrust upon them in the cruelest way possible. When Caleb Rowan buried his brother and sister-in-law on that scorching Texas afternoon, he inherited more than a failing ranch. He inherited 3 orphaned children who looked at him like he held all the answers. But he had none. Just grief, debt, and hands that knew how to break horses, but not how to braid a little girl's hair. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale of unexpected love and redemption travels across the world. The Texas sun had no mercy that September afternoon in 1878. It beat down on the dry earth like a blacksmith's hammer on an anvil, relentless and unforgiving. Caleb Rowan stood between 2 freshly dug graves, his hat in his calloused hands, watching as the last shovelful of earth fell onto the pine coffins that held his older brother Thomas and Thomas's wife Mary. The preacher's words had long since faded into the wind. The handful of neighbors who'd come to pay respects had already departed, their sympathetic looks and empty promises of help disappearing like morning dew under that merciless sun. Now it was just Caleb and the 3 children, Annie, Sam, and little Rose, standing in the shadow of loss so profound it seemed to swallow the very air around them. Caleb was 32 years old. He'd spent the better part of his life breaking horses, mending fences, and drifting from ranch to ranch across Texas. He knew cattle, and he knew solitude. He knew how to survive on jerky and creek water for weeks at a time. He knew the language of the land, could read weather in the sky and water in the lay of the hills. But children? Children were a complete mystery. 7-year-old Annie stood ramrod straight in her faded black dress, one of her mother's old ones, hastily altered by a neighbor woman's rough stitching. Her auburn hair, so like Thomas's, was pulled back severely from a face that had aged years in the past week. She held 5-year-old Sam's hand with a grip so tight the boy's fingers had gone white. Sam's face was blank, shocked into a silence that worried Caleb more than tears would have. And little Rose, just 3 years old, sat in the dust at their feet, playing with a smooth pebble, too young to fully understand that Mama and Papa weren't coming back. "Uncle Caleb?" Annie's voice was small, almost swallowed by the wind that swept across the open prairie. "What happens now?" What happens now? The question felt like a physical weight settling onto Caleb's already burdened shoulders. He looked down at his brother's children, and the truth hit him with the force of a kicked mule. These 3 small souls were his responsibility now. Not temporarily, not until some distant relative could be found. His. Forever. "Now we go home," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He cleared his throat, tried again. "We go back to the house and we figure things out. Together." The walk back to the farmhouse took 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. The Rowan Ranch, Thomas's ranch, though Caleb supposed it was his now, sat in a small valley 2 miles west of the town of Redemption, Texas. 60 acres of stubborn land, half of it decent grazing, the rest rocky soil that Thomas had tried and failed to coax into productivity. The house itself was a modest structure of weathered wood, 2 stories with a sagging porch and windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Thomas and Mary had been sick for 3 weeks before they died. Some kind of fever that swept through the county that summer, taking the old and the unlucky in equal measure. The doctor from town had come once, left some powders that did nothing, and never returned. Caleb had arrived too late, summoned by a desperate letter from Mary that found him 200 miles away in San Antonio, where he'd been working a cattle drive. By the time he'd ridden those 200 miles, pushing his horse harder than he should have, Thomas was already gone. Mary had lasted another 2 days, holding on just long enough to grip Caleb's hand with surprising strength and whisper, promise me you'll take care of them." He'd promised. What else could he do? Now, standing in the kitchen of Thomas's house, his house, Caleb looked around with a kind of desperate bewilderment. Dishes were piled in the basin, unwashed for days. The floor needed sweeping. The air smelled stale and sick, like the lingering ghost of the fever that had taken his brother. Through the doorway to the main room, he could see furniture covered in a fine layer of dust, curtains that hung limply in windows that needed airing. The children stood in a tight cluster near the door, watching him, waiting. "Are you hungry?" Caleb asked, because it seemed like the kind of thing a responsible adult should ask. Annie nodded slowly. We haven't eaten since this morning. Mrs. Henderson brought some eggs before the funeral, but they're gone now. Eggs. Right. Caleb moved to the pantry, hoping to find something, anything that resembled a meal. The shelves were sparse, some flour, though he couldn't tell if it was still good, a few tins of beans, a sack of cornmeal, some dried meat that looked questionable. He stared at the meager supplies and felt panic rising in his chest. He could track a deer for 3 days and bring it down with a single shot. He could deliver a breech calf and save both mother and baby. He could shoe a horse, build a fence, and read the land like other men read books. But he had no earthly idea how to feed 3 children. Beans, he announced, reaching for one of the tins. We'll have beans. Mama used to make cornbread to go with the beans, Sam offered quietly. It was the first thing the boy had said all day. Cornbread. Caleb knew there was cornmeal and probably the other things that went into cornbread, but knowing the ingredients existed and knowing how to combine them into something edible were 2 entirely different things. Right, he said, trying to sound confident. Cornbread. I'll just make some cornbread. Annie moved closer, standing on her tiptoes to see what he was doing. Do you know how, Uncle Caleb? The honest answer was no. The answer he gave was, how hard can it be? Very hard, as it turned out. An hour later, the kitchen was a disaster zone of spilled cornmeal, broken eggs. There had been 3 left in the henhouse, and Caleb had broken 2 trying to crack them, and a pan of what could generously be called cornbread, but more accurately resembled a flat, burned disk of sadness. The beans, at least, were edible, though he'd forgotten about them while wrestling with the cornbread and they'd burned on the bottom. The children ate without complaint, scraping beans off the top of the pot and avoiding the burned parts at the bottom. Annie tried a bite of the cornbread, chewed bravely, and quietly set it aside. Rose fell asleep at the table, her face pressed against the worn wood, exhausted by grief and the day's events. After dinner, if you could call it that, Caleb carried Rose up to bed. The children's rooms were on the 2nd floor, 2 small bedrooms that smelled of dust and loss. Annie and Rose shared one room. Sam had the other. Caleb laid Rose down gently, covering her with a thin blanket. The little girl didn't stir. Uncle Caleb? Annie stood in the doorway, Sam behind her. Are you going to stay, or are you going to leave like before? The question cut deeper than Annie probably intended. Caleb had left home at 16, striking out on his own when the weight of his father's expectations became too much to bear. Thomas had stayed, the dutiful son, taking over the family's small ranch when their parents passed. Caleb had drifted, visiting rarely, always restless, always moving on to the next job, the next town, the next horizon. I'm staying, Caleb said, and felt the words settle around him like chains. Not uncomfortable chains exactly, but binding nonetheless. I promised your mama. I'm staying. Annie studied him for a long moment, her old soul eyes searching his face for lies. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once and turned to lead Sam to his room. Alone, Caleb descended the stairs and walked out onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. From here, he could see the 2 graves on the hill, dark mounds against the fading light. His brother was up there, his sister-in-law. 2 people who'd built a life here, who'd brought 3 children into the world and loved them fiercely. And now those children belonged to him. The first week passed in a blur of disasters and desperate learning. Caleb burned breakfast every morning, when he remembered to make breakfast at all. He forgot to check on the chickens until Annie reminded him, found one of the hens dead because a fox had gotten into the coop, through a hole he should have noticed and repaired. He attempted laundry and turned all of Annie's light-colored dresses a sickly shade of gray. He tried to help Sam with his letters and realized he had the patience of a cornered rattlesnake when it came to teaching. The ranch work suffered too. There were fences that needed mending, cattle that needed tending, 100 tasks that couldn't be ignored. But every time Caleb tried to focus on the work, one of the children needed something. Rose cried for her mother at odd hours. Sam had nightmares that left him screaming in the dark. Annie tried so hard to help, to be the little mother, that it broke Caleb's heart to watch her. A 7-year-old carrying burdens no child should have to bear. The neighbors helped some. Mrs. Henderson, a plump widow from the neighboring ranch, brought food twice, and offered advice that Caleb was too proud to accept. "You need help, Mr. Rowan," she said on her second visit, standing in his chaotic kitchen with her arms crossed. "Those children need a woman's touch. A proper home." "We're managing," Caleb insisted, even though they clearly weren't. Mrs. Henderson gave him a look that said she knew exactly how well they were managing. "Pride's a fine thing in moderation, Mr. Rowan, but it makes for a poor substitute for hot meals and clean clothes." After she left, Caleb stood in the middle of the kitchen where a pot had boiled over earlier, leaving a sticky mess on the stove that he hadn't cleaned up yet, and wondered if she was right. Maybe he should find someone to help. A housekeeper, perhaps. But that cost money, and money was something the Rowan Ranch had precious little of. He'd found Thomas's account books in the desk drawer. The numbers told a grim story. The ranch was operating at a loss, had been for over a year. Thomas had borrowed against the property to buy more cattle, betting on beef prices rising. They hadn't. Now there were debts to the bank and redemption, debts to the feed store, debts to the doctor who'd failed to save Thomas and Mary. Caleb had some money saved from his years of drifting, but not enough. Not nearly enough. On the 10th day after the funeral, Caleb woke to find Annie in the kitchen before dawn, trying to start the stove. She'd pulled a chair over to reach the high shelf where the matches were kept, and stood on tiptoe, stretching. "Annie, what are you doing?" The girl turned, startled, and nearly lost her balance. Caleb caught her, lifted her down from the chair. "I was going to make breakfast," Annie said, her voice defensive. "You were still sleeping, and Sam and Rose will be hungry when they wake up. And I thought—" "You thought you'd take care of it yourself," Caleb finished. He knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Annie, you're 7 years old. Making breakfast isn't your job." "Then whose job is it?" Annie's voice cracked, and suddenly tears were streaming down her face. "Mama's gone and Papa's gone, and you don't know how to do anything, and somebody has to take care of things." The words hit Caleb like physical blows. He pulled Annie into his arms, felt her small body shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding in for days. Over her head, he saw his reflection in the dark window, a rough, unshaven man who looked about as lost as he felt. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning, Annie. I'm trying to learn. And you get to be a kid. You get to play and go to school and not worry about making breakfast or taking care of your brother and sister. That's my job now. I'm the grown-up here." "But what if you can't do it?" Annie whispered against his shoulder. "What if you leave?" "I won't leave," Caleb promised. "I'm not going anywhere. This is home now. You're home." Annie cried herself out while Caleb held her, and then she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I miss them so much." "I know, I miss them too. Do you think they can see us, Mama and Papa?" Caleb wasn't a particularly religious man, but looking at Annie's tear-stained face, he found himself hoping that wherever Thomas and Mary were, they could see their children, that they knew Caleb was trying his damnedest to do right by them. "Yeah," he said, "I think they can, and I think your mama is probably shaking her head at what I did to that cornbread last week." Annie laughed, a small, watery sound, but a laugh nonetheless. "It was pretty bad." "Worst cornbread in Texas," Caleb agreed. "Maybe all of America." They made breakfast together that morning. Well, Annie made breakfast while Caleb followed her instructions, measuring out flour and cracking eggs under her careful supervision. The biscuits they produced weren't perfect, but they were edible, and when Sam and Rose came downstairs, the kitchen smelled like food instead of smoke for the first time in over a week. Small victories. By the end of the second week, Caleb had developed a routine of sorts. Wake before dawn, get the stove going, attempt breakfast with Annie's help. Wake the younger children, make sure everyone was dressed. This was harder than it sounded, as Rose had strong opinions about which dress she wanted to wear, and Sam seemed to have forgotten the concept of clean clothes. Get them fed, get Sam and Annie ready for school. School. That was another thing Caleb had nearly forgotten about. There was a small schoolhouse in Redemption, one room where Miss Bennett, the new teacher, educated children ranging from 6 to 14. Annie had been attending before her parents fell ill. Sam was supposed to start this year. On Monday of the third week, Caleb hitched up the wagon and drove the children to town. It was the first time they'd left the ranch since the funeral. The 5-mile drive took them through open country, past other ranches and farms, across a shallow creek that was running low from the dry summer. Redemption, Texas, was not much to look at. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church at one end, a saloon at the other. There was a general store, a feed store, a bank, a blacksmith, a doctor's office, and a handful of houses. The schoolhouse sat on the edge of town, a white-painted building with a bell tower and a small yard where a few children were already playing. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop outside the school. His hands, he realized, were sweating. This felt oddly momentous, this handing over of the children to someone else's care for the day. What if they got upset? What if Rose cried for him? What if, "Uncle Caleb, we're going to be late." Annie had already climbed down from the wagon, ever practical. She helped Rose down, then took the younger girl's hand. Sam jumped down on his own, looking nervous. "Right," Caleb cleared his throat. "So I'll pick you up this afternoon, when school lets out." "We can walk home," Annie said. "We used to walk with Mama sometimes. It's not far." "No." The word came out sharper than Caleb intended. "No, I'll come get you. 3 o'clock, right?" Annie nodded, gave him a look that was part reassurance, part concern, then led her siblings toward the schoolhouse door. Caleb watched them go, feeling like he was sending them off to war rather than to school. "Mr. Rowan?" He turned to find a woman approaching the wagon. She was perhaps 30, dressed simply in a dark blue dress with her brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was pleasant without being beautiful, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "I'm Clara Bennett," she said, extending her hand. "The teacher. You must be Caleb Rowan. Annie and Sam's uncle?" Caleb climbed down from the wagon, shook her hand. Her grip was surprisingly firm. "Yes, ma'am. I'm looking after them now. Yes, I heard about Thomas and Mary. I'm so sorry for your loss." Clara Bennett's eyes were genuinely sympathetic. "Annie's a wonderful student. Very bright, very responsible. Sam will do well here too, I'm sure." That's good to hear." Caleb realized he was still holding her hand and released it quickly, feeling heat rise in his face. "They've been through a lot these past few weeks." "Of course, I'll keep an eye on them. Make sure they're adjusting." Clara glanced toward the schoolhouse where the children were filing inside. "Mr. Rowan, if you don't mind me saying, you look a bit overwhelmed." Overwhelmed, that was putting it mildly. "I'm managing," Caleb said, using his standard response. Clara studied him for a moment, her head tilted slightly. "Of course you are," she said, in a tone that suggested she didn't believe him for a second. "Well, if you ever need... that is, if there's anything I can do to help with the children's schooling, or anything else, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it." He climbed back into the wagon, tipped his hat to her and drove away, aware of her watching him go. Something about Clara Bennett unsettled him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at him, not with pity exactly, but with a kind of knowing understanding that made him feel transparent, like she could see right through his "I'm managing" to the chaos underneath. With the children in school, Caleb returned to the ranch and threw himself into work. There were fences down on the north pasture. Some of Thomas's cattle had wandered onto the neighboring property, and Caleb spent the morning rounding them up and repairing the fence line. It was hard, familiar work, and he was grateful for it. Out here, with just the cattle and the endless sky, things made sense in a way they didn't in the house. But 3 o'clock came too quickly. He barely had time to wash up before hitching the wagon again and heading back to town. He arrived to find children streaming out of the schoolhouse, their voices high and excited. Annie emerged with Rose's hand firmly in hers, Sam trailing behind. "How was school?" Caleb asked as they climbed into the wagon. "Fine," Annie said. "Good," Sam added. Rose said nothing, just climbed onto the seat beside Caleb and leaned against his leg, her small body warm and trusting. Something in Caleb's chest tightened. The drive home was quiet. By the time they reached the ranch, dark clouds were gathering on the western horizon. The air had that heavy, expectant quality that promised rain, something the parched land desperately needed. The storm hit after supper. Thunder rolled across the prairie like cannon fire, and lightning split the sky. Rain came down in sheets, drumming on the roof, pouring off the eaves. Caleb had just gotten the children settled when he heard it, a terrified scream from upstairs. He took the stairs 3 at a time, burst into the girls' room to find Rose sitting up in bed, crying hysterically. Annie was trying to comfort her, but the little girl was beyond consoling, screaming for her mama. "Hey, hey, it's all right." Caleb scooped Rose up, held her against his chest. She clung to him, her whole body shaking. "It's just thunder. It can't hurt you." "Want mama," Rose sobbed. "Want mama." What do you say to that? How do you explain to a 3-year-old that mama isn't coming back, that no amount of crying will bring her back? Caleb looked helplessly at Annie, who looked just as lost as he felt. "Your mama loved storms," Caleb found himself saying. He sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding Rose. "Did you know that? When she was younger, before she married your papa, she used to sit on her porch and watch the lightning. Said it made her feel small in a good way, like her problems didn't matter so much when she could see how big the world was." He didn't know if that was true. He barely remembered Mary from before she married Thomas, but it seemed like the kind of thing Mary would have done, and more importantly, it seemed to calm Rose. The little girl's sobs quieted to hiccups. "Really?" Annie asked. "Really," Caleb confirmed, committing fully to the lie. "So when you hear thunder, you can think of your mama watching the storm, appreciating how big and powerful the world is." Rose lifted her head from his shoulder, her face red and tear-stained. "Is mama in the storm?" "No, honey, but maybe she can see it, where she is now." It was thin comfort, but it was all he had. Rose seemed to accept it, settling back against his chest with a shuddering sigh. Caleb sat there holding his brother's daughter, listening to rain hammer the roof, and wondered how many more times he would be faced with questions he had no answers for. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and cool. Caleb carried Rose back to her own bed, tucked her in, waited until her breathing evened out in sleep. Annie was already asleep in her own bed. Caleb stood in the doorway for a moment, watching them, feeling the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. Downstairs, he found Sam still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a slate and chalk, working on his letters. "Shouldn't you be in bed?" Caleb asked. Sam looked up, his face serious. "Miss Bennett gave me homework, said I need to practice writing my name." Caleb pulled out a chair, sat down beside his nephew. "How's that going?" "Hard." Sam showed him the slate, which was covered in shaky, uneven letters. "I can't make the S right." Caleb took the chalk, wrote a careful S on the slate. "Like that. See how it curves?" Sam copied it, his tongue poking out in concentration. The result was slightly better than his previous attempts. They worked together for a while, Caleb guiding Sam's hand, helping him form the letters of his name. It was peaceful, this simple task, and Caleb found himself relaxing for the first time all day. Maybe he wasn't completely terrible at this guardian thing. Maybe... "Uncle Caleb?" Sam's voice was small. "Are you going to send us away?" The question came out of nowhere, hitting Caleb like a punch to the gut. "What? No, why would you think that?" Sam shrugged, not meeting his eyes. "Jimmy Henderson said you would. Said you were a drifter, and drifters don't keep kids. Said his ma said we'd probably end up in an orphanage." Caleb felt a surge of anger toward Mrs. Henderson and her gossiping mouth. "Jimmy Henderson doesn't know what he's talking about," he said firmly. "And neither does his ma. Your family, Sam. You and Annie and Rose, this is your home, and nobody's sending you anywhere, understand?" Sam nodded, but doubt still clouded his young face. "Look at me," Caleb said. He waited until Sam met his eyes. "I promise you, I'm not leaving, and I'm not sending you away. We're going to figure this out together. It might not be perfect, and I might burn a lot more cornbread before I get the hang of things, but we're a family now, that's what matters." "You promise?" "I promise." Sam seemed satisfied with that. He went back to practicing his letters, and Caleb sat with him until the slate was full of shaky but improving attempts at spelling his own name. After Sam went to bed, Caleb sat alone in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere a board creaked. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily. Outside, the wind moved through the cottonwood tree beside the house, making the leaves whisper. This house, these children, this life. None of it was what Caleb had planned. A month ago, he'd been a free man, answerable to no one, responsible for nothing beyond his next paycheck and where his next meal was coming from. Now he was Uncle Caleb, surrogate father to 3 grieving children, owner of a failing ranch, and completely out of his depth. But he'd made promises. To Mary, dying, to the children, to Thomas, buried up on that hill. And Caleb Rowan, for all his faults, kept his promises, even when he had no idea how. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the storm having broken the late summer heat. Caleb woke to find Annie already in the kitchen again, but this time she wasn't trying to cook. She was standing at the window, looking out at something. "What is it?" Caleb asked, moving to stand beside her. "There's someone coming," Annie said, pointing. "Up the road." Caleb squinted into the distance. Sure enough, a small figure was walking up the drive from the main road. A woman, from the shape of her, carrying something. They watched as the figure drew closer. As she came into clearer view, Caleb recognized Clara Bennett, the schoolteacher. She was wearing a simple gray dress, her hair in its usual neat bun, and she was carrying a large basket. "Miss Bennett?" Annie said. "From school?" "Looks like it." Caleb felt that same odd flutter of unease he'd experienced when meeting Clara before. He moved to the door, opened it as she approached the porch. Clara Bennett climbed the steps, slightly out of breath from the walk. Up close, Caleb could see a faint sheen of perspiration on her forehead, despite the cool morning. She'd walked 5 miles from town. "Why?" "Mr. Rowan," Clara said, offering a smile that was both warm and slightly hesitant. "I hope I'm not intruding." "No, ma'am," Caleb said automatically, even though he had no idea why she was there. "What can I do for you?" Clara lifted the basket she was carrying. I heard from some of the other children that things have been difficult here since the funeral, and I thought perhaps I could help. I brought some bread. I baked yesterday evening, and there's butter and some preserves, and—" She trailed off, seeming suddenly uncertain. In the morning light, Caleb could see that she was younger than he'd initially thought, maybe 28 or 29. There was something gentle about her face, something kind that put him in mind of his own mother. "That's very thoughtful, Miss Bennett, but please," Clara interrupted, I'm not trying to intrude or suggest that you can't manage. I know you must be doing your best. It's just—" She took a breath, met his eyes. "I remember when my father died. I was 12. My mother tried to hold everything together, but it was hard. So hard. And the neighbors who helped, who brought food, or just sat with us for a while, they made all the difference. I just thought, perhaps I could do the same for you and the children." There was something in her voice, a thread of understanding that cut through Caleb's reflexive pride. This wasn't pity. This was genuine compassion from someone who understood loss. "We'd be glad to accept," he heard himself say. "Thank you." Clara's smile broadened. She stepped into the house, set the basket on the kitchen table, and lifted the cloth covering it. The smell that wafted out was incredible. Fresh bread, still slightly warm, golden brown, and perfect. There were 2 loaves, along with a crock of butter and several jars of preserves. Annie had crept closer, drawn by the smell. "Did you really make this, Miss Bennett?" "I did. I like baking. It's peaceful." Clara looked around the kitchen, and Caleb could see her taking in the details. The unwashed dishes from last night's supper, the flour spilled on the counter, the general air of chaos that seemed to follow him everywhere. "Mr. Rowan, would you mind if That is, I have some time before I need to head back to town. Perhaps I could help tidy up a bit." Pride warred with desperation, pride lost. I'd appreciate that. And so Clara Bennett, the schoolteacher who had walked 5 miles carrying fresh bread, rolled up her sleeves and set to work on Caleb's disaster of a kitchen. She moved with efficient purpose, heating water for washing dishes, clearing the counter, organizing things that Caleb hadn't even realized were disorganized. Annie helped, eager to do something useful, and even Sam, emerging sleepy-eyed from upstairs, was drafted into service to sweep the floor. Caleb stood awkwardly for a moment, unsure what to do, until Clara looked up from the basin where she was washing dishes. "Mr. Rowan, don't you have ranch work to attend to?" He did, of course. Endless amounts of it. I don't want to leave you to do all this. I'm not doing it alone. I have excellent helpers. She smiled at Annie and Sam. We'll be fine. Go do what you need to do. We'll call you when breakfast is ready. It felt wrong, somehow, letting someone else take charge of his house. But the cattle did need tending, and there were a dozen other tasks waiting. So Caleb nodded, grabbed his hat, and headed out to the barn. He tried to focus on work, mucking out stalls, checking the tack, examining one of the horses who'd seemed off yesterday, but his attention kept drifting back to the house. Through the open barn door, he could hear occasional laughter, the sound of children's voices, the light melody of Clara singing something he didn't recognize. When had the house last sounded like that? Not since before Thomas and Mary got sick, certainly. Maybe not for months before that. An hour later, Annie appeared in the barn doorway. Uncle Caleb, Miss Bennet says breakfast is ready. The kitchen had been transformed. The dishes were washed and put away, the counter clean, the floor swept. The table was set with plates and cups, and in the center sat sliced bread, butter, preserves, and what appeared to be scrambled eggs. Where did the eggs come from? Caleb asked. The hen house, Clara said, as if it were obvious. You had 6 eggs. I used 4 for this and saved 2. Caleb had completely forgotten to check the hen house this morning. Hell, he'd forgotten to check it the last 2 days. The chickens were probably wondering if they'd been abandoned. They sat down to breakfast, him, Clara, and the 3 children. Rose, who had been shy when Clara first arrived, had warmed to the teacher and now sat next to her, chattering about something that had happened in her dream. Sam was attacking his eggs with single-minded determination. Annie was spreading butter on bread with a look of pure concentration. This is really good, Caleb said, because it was. The eggs were fluffy, perfectly seasoned. The bread was the best he'd ever tasted. Even the butter seemed better somehow. Thank you. Clara took a small bite of her own breakfast. My mother taught me to cook. She said a good meal could cure almost any ill. Could she cure Uncle Caleb's cooking? Sam asked innocently. Clara laughed, a warm musical sound. I'm sure your uncle's cooking will improve with practice. It can't get worse, Annie muttered, then looked horrified that she'd said it out loud. But Caleb found himself laughing too. She's not wrong. My cooking is pretty terrible. It's not terrible, Annie said loyally. It's just not good. They finished breakfast, and Clara helped clean up despite Caleb's protests. Then she gathered her empty basket, preparing to leave. Thank you, Caleb said, following her to the door. For the bread, for the help, for all of it. You're welcome. Clara paused on the porch, looking out at the ranch. Mr. Rowan, I meant what I said. If you need help with the children, with anything, please don't hesitate to ask. I know you're trying to do everything alone, but you don't have to. I appreciate that, Miss Bennet. I really do. She nodded, then started down the steps. She'd made it halfway across the yard when Caleb called out, Miss Bennet, how did you get here this morning? She turned back. I walked. You walked 5 miles in the dark? I left before dawn. It wasn't dark by the time I arrived. Still, Caleb shook his head. At least let me drive you back to town. It's the least I can do. Clara looked like she might argue, then smiled. That would be kind, thank you. Caleb hitched up the wagon, helped Clara climb up to the seat, and they set off down the drive. The children waved from the porch, Annie holding Rose's hand. The drive to town was quiet at first. Caleb focused on the road, on the rhythmic clip-clop of the horse's hooves, on anything but the woman sitting beside him. But eventually, Clara broke the silence. They're good children, she said. Annie especially is very bright, and Sam is coming along well with his reading. They've had a rough time of it, Caleb said. So have you. He glanced at her, surprised. Ma'am? You've had a rough time too, Clara clarified. Losing your brother, suddenly becoming responsible for 3 children, trying to keep a ranch running, that can't be easy. I'm managing, Caleb said, his standard response. Clara was quiet for a moment. You know, Mr. Rowan, there's no shame in admitting when things are difficult. No shame in accepting help. I know that. Do you? She turned to look at him. Because it seems to me like you're trying to do everything yourself. trying to be both mother and father to those children, trying to run the ranch alone, trying to prove what? That you don't need anyone? The words hit closer to home than Caleb wanted to admit. He kept his eyes on the road. I made a promise to my sister-in-law. I'm just trying to keep it. And you're doing a good job, Clara said gently. But good intentions aren't enough. Those children need more than just someone who keeps his promises. They need someone who knows how to care for them. And you, forgive me for being blunt, but you're clearly struggling. I'll figure it out, Caleb said, his jaw tight. I'm sure you will. But why should you have to figure it out alone? He had no answer to that. They reached Redemption a few minutes later. Caleb pulled the wagon up in front of the schoolhouse, which sat quiet and empty since it was Saturday. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Rowan. Clara climbed down from the wagon, then paused. I'll be by next Saturday, if that's all right with you. I can bring more bread, help with the housework, spend some time with the children. You don't have to do that, Caleb said. I know I don't have to. I want to. Clara adjusted her basket. Those children lost their parents, Mr. Rowan, but they still need someone who can give them a sense of normalcy, of home. I can help with that, if you'll let me. Caleb looked at her. This woman who barely knew him, who had no obligation to help, who'd walked 5 miles in the pre-dawn darkness just to bring fresh bread to a struggling man and 3 orphaned children. Something in her face, some combination of kindness and determination, made him nod. All right, he said. Next Saturday. And, thank you, Miss Bennett. Clara, she said. If I'm going to be coming by regularly, you might as well call me Clara. Clara, then. I'm Caleb. She smiled. I know. Annie talks about you at school. She's worried about you, you know. Annie's 7. She shouldn't be worrying about me. No, she shouldn't, but she does. They all do. Clara stepped back from the wagon. That's what family does, Caleb. They worry about each other. They help each other. Remember that. She turned and walked toward a small house at the end of the street, where she must live, Caleb realized. He watched her go, then drove the wagon back toward his ranch, his head full of thoughts he couldn't quite sort through. When he arrived home, the children were playing in the yard. Actually playing, laughing, Annie chasing Sam while Rose watched from the porch. It was the first time he'd seen them act like normal children since the funeral. Did you like Miss Bennett? Annie asked when she spotted him. She seems nice, Caleb said carefully. She's the best teacher ever, Sam announced, and she makes really good bread. She's pretty, Annie added, giving Caleb a look he couldn't quite interpret. I suppose she is, Caleb agreed, feeling his face heat up. Annie's smile suggested she'd gotten exactly the reaction she wanted. The following Saturday, true to her word, Clara arrived mid-morning with another basket. This time it held bread, a jar of stew that just needed heating, and what she called cookies, sweet biscuits that made Rose's eyes light up with delight. I thought I'd spend the day, Clara said. If that's all right. There are some things I could help with, and I wanted to spend time with the children outside of school. So Clara Bennett became a regular presence at the Rowan Ranch. Every Saturday, she would arrive in the morning. Caleb started driving to town to pick her up after that first walk, and stay until late afternoon. She brought food, helped with housework, played with Rose while Annie and Sam did their homework, and slowly, gently, began to bring order to the chaos that had been Caleb's life since becoming a guardian. She taught Caleb how to cook simple meals, not just how to follow a recipe, but how to understand food, how to tell when something was done, how to adjust seasoning by taste. She showed him how to mend clothes, how to organize the house so things could be found when needed, how to establish routines that made life run more smoothly. But more than that, she brought something intangible to the ranch, a sense of peace maybe, or hope. The children blossomed under her attention. Rose, who'd been so withdrawn and clingy, started acting like a normal 3-year-old, getting into mischief, laughing more easily. Sam's nightmares decreased. Annie stopped trying to be the little mother and started acting like the child she was. And Caleb found himself looking forward to Saturdays in a way he hadn't anticipated, looking forward to Clara's arrival, to her gentle guidance, to her laugh when something went wrong in the kitchen, to the conversations they'd have while working side by side. You're getting better at this, Clara commented one Saturday in late October, watching Caleb knead dough for bread. They were alone in the kitchen. The children were outside playing. I have a good teacher, Caleb replied. You're a quick learner, that helps. Clara paused. How are things going otherwise? With the ranch? Caleb stopped kneading, looking down at the dough. Could be better. Could be worse. I've been selling off some of Thomas's cattle to pay down debts. It helps, but it also means less income long term. That's difficult. I'll figure it out, Caleb said. It was becoming his mantra. Clara moved closer, looking at the dough. You're working it too much. It'll get tough. Gentle hands, remember? Her hand brushed his as she demonstrated the proper technique, and Caleb felt a jolt of awareness that caught him completely off guard. He stepped back slightly, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, of the faint scent of lavender soap that clung to her, of the way the afternoon light caught in her hair. Caleb? Clara was looking at him with a slightly puzzled expression. Are you all right? Fine, he said quickly. Just thinking about the ranch, the debts. If she noticed his sudden awkwardness, she was kind enough not to mention it. They finished the bread in comfortable silence, and Caleb tried very hard not to think about the way his heart had jumped when Clara's hand touched his. He was just grateful for her help, he told himself. That was all. She was kind and helpful and good with the children. His reaction didn't mean anything beyond basic human appreciation. He almost convinced himself it was true. As autumn deepened into November, the rhythm of life on the Rowan Ranch began to find its footing. The trees along the creek turned golden and red, their leaves drifting down to carpet the ground in brilliant color. The air grew crisp in the mornings, requiring jackets and the lighting of fires in the stove before dawn. And every Saturday, without fail, Clara Bennett arrived to spend the day helping transform a house of grief into something that resembled a home. Caleb found himself marking time by her visits. Monday through Friday blurred together in a constant struggle of ranch work, school runs, meals that were gradually improving but still far from perfect, and the nightly ritual of getting 3 exhausted children into bed. But Saturdays had taken on a different quality entirely. They were lighter somehow, easier. The work got done faster with Clara there, and the children were happier, their laughter filling rooms that had been silent for too long. It was on the second Saturday in November that things began to shift in ways Caleb didn't quite know how to name. He'd picked Clara up from town as usual, the children bundled in the back of the wagon, chattering excitedly about their week at school. Rose had climbed into Clara's lap almost immediately, and Clara had wrapped her arms around the little girl with an ease that made something in Caleb's chest tighten. Miss Clara, I drawed you a picture, Rose announced, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. See? That's you, and that's me, and that's Uncle Caleb, and that's Annie and Sam. Clara examined the drawing with appropriate seriousness. 5 stick figures stood in front of what might have been a house, all holding hands. This is beautiful, Rose. Thank you. May I keep it? Rose nodded enthusiastically. You can put it on your wall. I absolutely will. Back at the ranch, Clara set to work on the kitchen while Caleb headed out to deal with a section of fence that needed replacing. He'd been at it for about an hour when he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to find Clara walking toward him, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. I thought you might be hungry, she said, setting the basket down. There's bread and cheese and some of that dried beef from last week. You didn't have to come all the way out here, Caleb said, but he was already reaching for the basket. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell of fresh bread hit him. I know I didn't have to. Clara sat down on a nearby rock, arranging her skirts. But I wanted to talk to you about something, and the children are occupied with their lessons. Caleb felt a flutter of concern. Is something wrong? Are they not doing well in school? No, nothing like that. They're doing wonderfully. Clara paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. I wanted to talk to you about Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving? Caleb bit into the bread, his mind scrambling. When was Thanksgiving? He'd completely lost track of dates. It's next week, Clara said gently. Thursday. And I know the children haven't mentioned it, but, well, it was their mother's favorite holiday. Mary used to cook for days beforehand. The whole town knew about her Thanksgiving dinners. Caleb set down the bread, his appetite suddenly gone. I didn't know that. I thought you might not. I heard about it from some of the other women in town. Clara leaned forward slightly. Caleb, I don't want to overstep, but I think it would be good for the children to mark the day somehow. to acknowledge it. Otherwise, it becomes this hole in the calendar, this reminder of what they've lost. He could see the wisdom in that, even as the thought of trying to create some kind of Thanksgiving celebration made him want to climb on his horse and ride for the next county. I don't know the first thing about cooking a Thanksgiving dinner. I know. That's why I'm offering to help. Clara met his eyes. If you'll allow it, I'd like to spend Thanksgiving with you and the children. I can help prepare the meal, make sure it's special for them. Make sure they have good memories instead of just sad ones. Caleb studied her face, trying to understand what was really being offered here. You don't have family to spend Thanksgiving with? Friends? Something flickered across Clara's face, a shadow of old pain, there and gone in an instant. My mother passed 5 years ago. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but we're not close. Usually I spend the day quietly at home. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I'd much rather spend it with people who appreciate my cooking. The children would love that, Caleb said, and I'd appreciate it too, more than I can say. Then it's settled. Clara stood, brushing off her skirts. I'll come Wednesday afternoon to help prepare, and I'll stay over if that's all right. We'll need to get an early start Thursday morning if we're going to have everything ready. Stay over. That meant she'd sleep in the house, in the small spare room off the kitchen that had been used for storage since Caleb arrived. The thought should have made him uncomfortable. There would be talk in town, he was sure of it, but all he felt was relief. Relief that he wouldn't have to face this particular challenge alone. I'll have the spare room ready for you, he said. Thank you, Caleb. Clara started back toward the house, then turned. And Caleb? You're doing better than you think. The children are thriving. Thomas and Mary would be proud of you. She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone with a half-eaten piece of bread and a throat that had gone suddenly tight. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Caleb cleaned out the spare room, airing it thoroughly and making sure it was suitable for a guest. Annie helped him put fresh sheets on the narrow bed, her eyes bright with excitement. Is Miss Clara really going to stay here? She asked for the third time. Just for one night, Caleb confirmed, so she can help with Thanksgiving dinner. Mama used to make the best Thanksgiving dinner, Annie said softly. Everyone said so. I know, honey. That's why Miss Clara is helping. We want to make it special, the way your mama would have wanted. Annie was quiet for a moment, smoothing out a wrinkle in the bedsheet. Uncle Caleb? Do you think Mama would be mad that Miss Clara is cooking instead of her? The question caught Caleb off guard. He knelt down so he was eye level with his niece. No, sweetheart. I think your mama would be grateful that someone kind is making sure you have a good Thanksgiving. Your mama wanted you to be happy. That's all she ever wanted. Annie nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. I like Miss Clara. I know you do. Do you like her, Uncle Caleb? There was something in Annie's voice, a note of careful interest that made Caleb suspicious. Of course I like her. She's been very helpful. That's not what I mean, Annie said, with the exasperated tone of a child dealing with a particularly slow adult. I mean, do you like her the way Papa liked Mama? Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. Annie, we're not. Miss Clara is just being neighborly, that's all. Annie gave him a look that clearly said she didn't believe him, but mercifully, she didn't push the subject. Wednesday afternoon arrived with a cold wind that promised winter. Caleb drove to town to pick up Clara, finding her waiting with not one but 3 large baskets. What's all this? He asked, loading them into the wagon. Supplies, Clara said cheerfully. I've been preparing. We're going to have a proper Thanksgiving dinner, which means we need proper ingredients. The drive back to the ranch was comfortable, filled with Clara's chatter about her plans for the meal. Caleb found himself relaxing, drawn in by her enthusiasm. By the time they arrived home, he was actually looking forward to the next 2 days. The children greeted Clara like she was bringing Christmas itself. Rose latched onto her leg immediately. Sam peppered her with questions about what they'd be eating, and Annie hovered nearby with barely contained excitement. All right, everyone, Clara announced, setting down her baskets. We have a lot of work to do if we're going to be ready for tomorrow. Annie, I'll need your help in the kitchen. Sam, you're in charge of gathering kindling for the stove. We'll need extra. Rose, you can help me set the table later. And Caleb, she turned to him with a smile that made his heart do something complicated in his chest. Caleb, We're going to need a turkey. Please tell me you know how to get a turkey. I can get a turkey, Caleb confirmed. In fact, there were several wild turkeys that roosted in the cottonwoods down by the creek. He'd seen them often enough. Shooting one would be easy. Good. We'll need it plucked and dressed by tonight so I can start the preparations first thing in the morning. Caleb nodded and headed out, rifle in hand. It felt good to have a clear task, something he knew how to do. The turkeys were where he expected them to be, and within 30 minutes he'd brought down a good-sized tom. He carried it back to the barn where he set about the unpleasant business of preparing it. He was halfway through plucking when Clara appeared in the barn doorway. "How's it going?" "Fine, should be done soon." Caleb looked up, feathers clinging to his hands and shirt. "How are things in the house?" "Organized chaos. Annie's helping me make pies. Rose is being 3 and getting into everything. Sam's done an excellent job with the kindling." Clara moved closer, watching him work. "You're good at that. I've dressed plenty of game. Turkey's not so different." "Caleb, can I ask you something?" There was something in her tone that made him pause, setting down the half-plucked bird. "Sure." "Why did you leave? Years ago, I mean. Why did you leave your brother and your family's ranch?" It was a fair question, one he'd been half expecting since the day he arrived back in Texas to find his brother dying. "My father and I didn't see eye to eye on things. He had expectations about who I should be, what I should do. Thomas fit those expectations perfectly. I didn't." Caleb picked up the turkey again, resumed plucking. "So I left. Figured I'd make my own way, be my own man." "Do you regret it?" Caleb thought about that. "I regret not being here when Thomas needed me. I regret not knowing Mary better, not watching the children grow up. But leaving itself? I don't know. I needed to figure out who I was away from my father's shadow, and I did that." "And who are you, Caleb Rowan?" He looked up at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life bearing bread and kindness, who'd helped him more than she could possibly know. "I'm still figuring that out." Clara smiled. "I think you're further along than you realize." That evening, the house filled with the smell of baking pies, pumpkin and apple, their sweet scent mingling with the wood smoke from the stove. Clara moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, directing Annie in rolling out crusts, keeping Rose entertained and out from underfoot, occasionally calling out instructions to Caleb as he finished preparing the turkey. Supper that night was simple, soup and bread, but it felt festive somehow. The children were giddy with anticipation, talking over each other about what they hoped to eat tomorrow. Clara sat at the table with them, wiping Rose's face when she got soup on her chin, laughing at Sam's jokes, answering Annie's endless questions about the cooking process. And Caleb, watching from his seat at the head of the table, felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Contentment. Maybe even happiness. The house was warm and full of life. The children were smiling, and Clara was looking at him. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment the noise of the children faded into background. She smiled at him, a soft, warm smile that seemed to hold an entire conversation they hadn't had yet, and Caleb felt his chest tighten in that way that was becoming familiar whenever she was near. He looked away first, busying himself with his soup, telling himself he was imagining things. Clara was here out of kindness, out of Christian charity, out of concern for the children, nothing more. But when he glanced back up, she was still watching him, and the expression on her face suggested she might be imagining the same impossible things he was. After supper, after the children had been bundled off to bed with promises that tomorrow would be special, Caleb and Clara found themselves alone in the kitchen. Clara was making final preparations for the morning, her hands busy with dough and herbs. "You should get some rest," Caleb said. "You've been working all day." "I'm almost done. Just want to get this bread ready for rising overnight." Clara kneaded the dough with steady, practiced movements. "Besides, I'm too excited to sleep yet." "Excited about cooking?" "Excited about tomorrow, about giving the children a good memory." She paused in her kneading. "Caleb, I know you think I'm doing this out of duty or charity, but that's not it at all. Then why?" Clara was quiet for a long moment, her hands still in the dough. "Because I've been lonely. Because teaching is fulfilling, but it's not the same as having a family. Because when I'm here with you and the children, I feel..." She trailed off, shook her head. "Never mind. I'm being foolish. Caleb moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. What do you feel, Clara? She looked up at him, and in the lamplight her eyes were soft and vulnerable. I feel like I belong somewhere, like I'm part of something that matters. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the settling of the house around them. Caleb was acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the flour dusting Clara's hands, of the way her breath caught slightly when he reached out and gently brushed a smudge of flour from her cheek. Clara, Uncle Caleb? Sam's voice floated down from upstairs. I can't sleep. Can you tell me a story? The moment broke. Clara stepped back, returning to her bread dough. Caleb cleared his throat, tried to remember how to form words. Sam needs... Go, Clara said softly. I'll finish up here. Caleb went upstairs, his heart still pounding, and spent the next 30 minutes telling Sam a rambling story about a cowboy and a wild Mustang. By the time he came back downstairs, Clara had retired to the spare room, her door closed, a line of light showing beneath it. Caleb lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom, trying to make sense of the feelings churning through him. He'd known Clara for less than 2 months. She was the children's teacher. She was helping him out of kindness. Anything else was just his imagination running wild because he was grateful, and she was the first woman to show him any real attention in years. Except it didn't feel like imagination. It felt real and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and clear. Caleb woke before sunrise to find Clara already in the kitchen, the stove blazing, the turkey already in the oven. She looked up when he entered, her face flushed from the heat. Good morning, she said. I hope I didn't wake you. You didn't. Ranchers get up early. Caleb moved to the stove, poured himself coffee from the pot Clara had already made. What can I do to help? Keep the children occupied while I cook. That's the biggest help you can give me. That turned out to be easier said than done. The children were excited, running through the house with an energy that had been absent for months. Caleb did his best, taking them outside to do chores, letting them help feed the horses and chickens, playing a game of tag in the yard that left everyone breathless and laughing. Around noon, Clara called them in. The table had been transformed, covered with a cloth Caleb didn't recognize, and set with dishes that must have been Mary's good china, brought down from storage. And the food was magnificent. The turkey sat golden and perfect in the center, surrounded by dishes of stuffing and potatoes and vegetables and fresh bread. The pies waited on the counter, their crusts perfectly browned. It's beautiful, Annie breathed. It's what your mama would have wanted, Clara said gently. She looked at Caleb. Would you like to say grace? Caleb wasn't much for praying, but he bowed his head, trying to find words adequate to the moment. Lord, we're grateful for this food, for this day, for Clara's help and kindness. We're grateful for family, both the ones we've lost and the ones who remain. Watch over Thomas and Mary. Let them know their children are loved and cared for. Amen. Amen, the children chorused. They ate until they couldn't eat anymore, the children exclaiming over every dish, Clara blushing at their compliments. For a while, the sadness that had hung over the house seemed to lift entirely, replaced by warmth and laughter and the simple joy of being together. After dinner, while the children played with toys Clara had quietly brought, new things they hadn't seen before, Caleb helped with the dishes. You didn't have to bring them presents, he said quietly. I wanted to. It's Thanksgiving. Children should have something to be excited about. Clara handed him a wet plate to dry. Besides, I can afford it. Teachers don't make much, but I live simply. You've done so much already. Caleb, when are you going to stop acting like my help is some kind of burden? I want to be here. I want to help. She paused, her hand still in the dishwater. I care about you. About all of you. This family. There it was again, that current of something more running beneath her words. Caleb set down the plate he was drying, turned to face her. Clara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She turned off the water, dried her hands on her apron, waiting. Why do you really come here every Saturday? And don't say it's just to help or because you care about the children's education. There's something else. I can feel it. Clara's face flushed, but she didn't look away. You want honesty? All right. I come here because being with you and the children makes me happy in a way nothing else does. I come here because I'm 30 years old and I'd resigned myself to being alone forever. And then you appeared with 3 children who needed someone, and I thought maybe, just maybe I could be that someone. I come here because, she took a breath, because I've fallen in love with this family, with the children, with you. The kitchen went very quiet. From the other room came the sound of the children's laughter, but it seemed distant, muffled. Clara, Caleb started, but he didn't know how to finish. I know it's inappropriate, Clara said quickly. I know I shouldn't have said anything. You're grieving your brother. You're trying to build a life for his children. The last thing you need is some spinster teacher making declarations. Caleb stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You're not a spinster. You're kind and capable and beautiful, and the children adore you. And He stopped, swallowed hard. I think I've been falling in love with you too. I just didn't want to admit it because it felt too soon, too fast, too much given everything that's happened. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? Caleb reached out, took her hand. Her fingers were still damp from the dishwater, her palm warm against his. I don't know what to do about it. I don't know if it's right, or if we should wait, or what Thomas would think, or Thomas would want you to be happy, Clara interrupted. He'd want his children to be happy. And Caleb, we are happy. All of us. Can't you feel it? He could. That was the thing. He absolutely could. Despite the grief and the struggle and the uncertainty, there was happiness here. In this house, with these children, with this woman who'd walked into his life carrying bread and a smile. What do we do now? Caleb asked. Clara squeezed his hand. We take it slowly. We see where this goes. We put the children first always. And she smiled through her tears. We stop pretending that we're just friends when we're clearly something more. From the other room, Annie's voice called out, Uncle Caleb, Miss Clara, can we have pie now? They broke apart, both laughing a little at the timing. Clara wiped her eyes. Yes, she called back, we can have pie. They served the pie, pumpkin for Caleb and Sam, apple for Annie and Rose, a slice of each for Clara. They sat together at the table as the afternoon light began to fade, talking and laughing, the children oblivious to the shift that had occurred between the two adults. That evening, after the children had finally crashed from their sugar high and been tucked into bed, Caleb walked Clara to the spare room. Thank you, he said, for today, for everything. Thank you for letting me be part of it. Clara paused at her door. Caleb, I meant what I said, about taking things slowly. I don't want to rush this or confuse the children or... He kissed her. It was gentle and brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it felt like a promise. When he pulled back, Clara's eyes were wide. Sorry, Caleb said. I wanted to do that. Just once. So you'd know I meant what I said too. Clara touched her fingers to her lips, a smile spreading across her face. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Clara. He went to his own room, lay in bed with his heart pounding and his mind racing. He'd kissed Clara Bennett. He'd told her he was falling in love with her. She'd said the same to him. It was terrifying and exhilarating, and it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump. But for the first time since Thomas died, Caleb felt like maybe, just maybe, he was building something that could last. Something good. The next morning, Friday, Caleb drove Clara back to town. The children were subdued, sad to see her go, but content in the way children are when they've had a truly good day. When will you come back? Rose asked, clinging to Clara's skirts. Tomorrow, sweetheart, just like always. Clara knelt down, hugged the little girl. I'll bring more bread. And cookies? Rose asked hopefully. And cookies. The drive to town was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Caleb's hand rested on the wagon seat between them, and halfway there, Clara reached over and took it. They drove like that the rest of the way, hands clasped, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. When they reached Clara's house, Caleb helped her down from the wagon. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. See you tomorrow. Tomorrow, Caleb confirmed. He watched her go inside, then then drove back to the ranch with a lightness in his chest that had nothing to do with Thanksgiving dinner and everything to do with possibility. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Clara still came every Saturday, but now there was an added dimension to her visits. She and Caleb would find moments alone. In the kitchen while the children played, in the barn when she brought him lunch, in the quiet after everyone else had gone to bed, and in those moments they would talk, really talk, about their pasts and their hopes and their fears. They would hold hands. Sometimes Caleb would steal a kiss when no one was looking. They were building something together, slowly and carefully, with the children's well-being always at the forefront. Annie noticed, of course. Children always notice. But she seemed pleased rather than upset, which Caleb took as a good sign. December arrived with cold winds and the first dusting of snow. The ranch work grew harder in the cold, but Caleb found he didn't mind as much as he used to. There was something to look forward to now, someone waiting. The house stayed warmer, the meals tasted better, the children's laughter came easier. It was the second Saturday in December when everything changed again. Clara had spent the day at the ranch as usual, helping with laundry and mending while Caleb worked on winterizing the barn. The children had been playing in the yard, building a snowman with the thin layer of snow that had fallen overnight. As afternoon faded toward evening, Clara gathered her things to leave. "I'll drive you," Caleb said, reaching for his coat. "Actually," Clara said, and there was something hesitant in her voice. "Could we talk first? Alone?" Caleb felt a flutter of concern. "Of course. Children, stay inside where it's warm." They walked to the barn where the horses nickered softly in their stalls. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, though whether from cold or nervousness, Caleb couldn't tell. "What is it?" he asked gently. Clara was quiet for a long moment. "I've been offered a position. In Denver." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. "Denver?" "It's a good position. Head teacher at a larger school, more money, more opportunities." Clara finally looked at him, her eyes troubled. "They've asked me to start after the new year. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know." Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. It's everything I've worked toward, but now I have reasons to stay." She moved closer to him. "Caleb, I need to know, is this real? What we have? Because if I turn down Denver, if I stay here, I need to know it's for something that has a future." Caleb understood what she was asking. She was asking for a commitment, for some assurance that she wasn't throwing away her career for something that might not last. And the terrifying thing was, he wanted to give her that assurance. Despite knowing her for only a few months, despite the complications, despite everything, he wanted her to stay. "I can't ask you to give up an opportunity like that," Caleb said carefully. "That wouldn't be fair to you." "I'm not asking you to ask me. I'm asking you to tell me the truth. Do you see a future for us? Or am I just convenient? Someone to help with the children and the house?" "God, no. Clara, you're not convenient. Caleb struggled for words adequate to what he felt. "You're the best thing that's happened to this family. To me. When I think about the future now, I think about you being part of it. I think about the children growing up with you there. I think about us building something together." "Then say it," Clara whispered. "Say what we've both been thinking, but haven't had the courage to speak out loud." Caleb took her hands in his. They were cold, and he rubbed them gently to warm them. "Stay. Please stay. Not just for the children, though God knows they need you. Stay for me. Because I love you, Clara Bennett, and the thought of you going to Denver makes me feel like I'm losing something precious before I've even had a chance to fully appreciate what it is." To warm them. "Stay. Please stay. Not just for the children, though God knows they need you. Stay for me. Because I love you, Clara Bennett, and the thought of you going to Denver makes me feel like I'm losing something precious before I've even had a chance to fully appreciate what it is." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. "I love you too. I've loved you for weeks now, but Caleb, I need more than words. I need to know, marry me." The words were out before Caleb fully realized he was going to say them. But once they were spoken, he knew they were right. Completely, absolutely right. Clara stared at him. "What?" "Marry me," Caleb repeated more firmly this time. I know it's fast. I know people will talk. I know there are 100 practical reasons to wait. But Clara, life's too short and too uncertain. I lost my brother. You lost your parents. We both know how quickly things can change. So why wait? Why not grab happiness when we find it? He squeezed her hands. Marry me. Be a mother to these children who already love you. Be my partner in building this ranch into something Thomas would be proud of. Be my wife. Caleb, are you sure? This isn't just gratitude. This isn't just, I'm sure. And he was. It felt like the most certain thing in his life. I'm completely sure. Clara laughed through her tears. Then yes, yes, I'll marry you. Caleb pulled her into his arms, held her close, breathing in the lavender scent of her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other in grief and were choosing to build something new together. When? Clara asked against his chest. Soon. Christmas, maybe? Give the children something joyful to associate with the holiday. Clara pulled back to look at him. What about the town? What will people say? Let them say what they want. Anyone who matters will understand. Caleb cupped her face in his hands. You've saved me, Clara. You've saved all of us. And I want the whole world to know it. They kissed then, longer and deeper than before, a kiss full of promise and commitment and the beginning of something lasting. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara was smiling. We should tell the children. Together. They walked back to the house hand in hand. The children were in the kitchen, Rose coloring, Sam reading, Annie setting the table for supper. Children, Caleb said, can you come sit down? Miss Clara and I have something to tell you. 3 pairs of eyes turned to them, suddenly wary. Annie's gaze dropped to their joined hands, and something like hope flickered across her face. Is Miss Clara leaving? Sam asked, his voice small. No, Clara said quickly, sitting down at the table. She drew Rose onto her lap. I'm not leaving. In fact, I'm going to be staying permanently. Annie's eyes went wide. Permanently? Caleb took a breath. I've asked Miss Clara to marry me, and she said yes. For a moment there was absolute silence. Then Annie burst into tears. Before Caleb could panic, she ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. Happy tears, she managed through her sobs. These are happy tears. Because now Miss Clara will really be our mama? Clara looked at Caleb, a question in her eyes. He nodded slightly. If you'd like me to be, Clara said gently, I know I can't replace your mama. I wouldn't try to. But I can love you and take care of you and be here for you, always. If you'll let me. Yes, Annie said fiercely. Yes, please. Me too, Sam added, moving closer to Clara. Can I call you Mama? If you want to, sweetheart. Rose, who'd been quiet through all of this, looked up at Clara with her wide blue eyes. You're going to live here? I am. Forever? Forever. Rose considered this, then nodded decisively. Okay, that's good. She went back to her coloring as if the matter was settled, and somehow that simple acceptance meant more to Clara than anything else could have. That night, after Clara had finally left, with promises to return the next day to start planning, Caleb sat in the quiet kitchen and marveled at how life could change. 3 months ago, he'd been a drifter, responsible for no one, answerable to no one. Now he was a father figure to 3 children and engaged to be married to a woman who made him believe in second chances. Annie came downstairs, unable to sleep with excitement. Uncle Caleb? Are you really happy? He pulled her onto his lap, this serious little girl who'd grown up too fast. I really am. Are you? Yes? Annie paused. Do you think Mama and Papa would be happy? Caleb thought about Thomas and Mary, about the life they'd built here, about the love they'd had for their children. I think they'd be very happy. I think they'd love Clara. And I think they'd be glad to know you kids will have someone who can give you the kind of home they wanted for you. I miss them, Annie whispered. I know, sweetheart. I miss them too. We always will. Caleb hugged her close. But missing them doesn't mean we can't also be happy. Your Mama and Papa would want us to be happy. Annie was quiet for a moment, then nodded against his chest. I think Mama Clara, I think she's nice. I think this is good. So do I, Annie. So do I. The news of the engagement spread through Redemption like wildfire. By Monday morning, when Caleb drove the children to school, it seemed half the town already knew. Mrs. Henderson stopped them on the street, her face a mixture of surprise and something that might have been disapproval. "Mr. Rowan," she said, her voice tight, "I heard some rather surprising news this morning about you and Miss Bennet." Caleb kept his voice steady. "If you heard we're engaged, then you heard correctly." Mrs. Henderson's lips pursed. "It's awfully fast, don't you think? Your brother's barely been gone 3 months." "My brother would want his children to have a proper home. Clara can give them that." Caleb tipped his hat, signaling the conversation was over. "Good day, Mrs. Henderson." He drove on, aware of her watching him go, aware of other eyes tracking their progress down the street. Let them talk. He'd faced down stampeding cattle and breaking broncos. He could handle small-town gossip. But that evening, when he picked up the children from school, Clara pulled him aside. Her face was troubled, her usual smile strained. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, though he could guess. "Nothing. It's just—" Clara glanced toward where the children were playing in the schoolyard. "Several of the mothers were quite vocal today about their opinions on our engagement. Mrs. Henderson in particular seemed to think I was being inappropriate, taking advantage of a grieving man." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Clara's voice was quiet. "Caleb, maybe we should wait. Give it more time. Let people adjust to the idea. Or," Caleb said, taking her hand, "we could stop caring what Mrs. Henderson thinks and focus on what we know is right. Clara, do you love me?" "You know I do." "And I love you. The children are happy. We're building something good here. Why should we put that on hold because some bitter widow thinks she knows better?" He squeezed her hand. "Unless you're having doubts." "No. No doubts." Clara's smile returned, tentative but real. "You're right. We know what's true. That's what matters." But the gossip continued, and it took a toll. Over the next week, Clara faced pointed questions and barely concealed disapproval from several families. 2 mothers withdrew their children from her classroom, claiming they were needed at home, but making it clear their real objection was to Clara's unseemly haste in accepting Caleb's proposal. Caleb saw the strain it put on her, even as she tried to hide it. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. Her Saturday visits continued, but some of the light had gone out of her eyes. It was the 3rd Sunday of December when everything came to a head. Caleb had taken the children to church, something he'd been doing more regularly since Clara had gently suggested it might be good for them. Clara was there, sitting in her usual pew near the back. After the service, as people filed out into the cold morning air, Reverend Thomas called out, "Mr. Rowan, Miss Bennet, might I have a word?" They followed him back into the church, the children trailing curiously behind. The Reverend was an older man, white-haired and kind-faced, who'd presided over Thomas and Mary's funeral. "I wanted to speak with you both," Reverend Thomas said, settling into a pew and gesturing for them to sit. "I've been hearing talk around town about your engagement." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. And I wanted you to know that I think it's wonderful." The Reverend's face broke into a warm smile. "I've watched you these past months, Caleb, struggling to care for your brother's children. I've watched Clara step in to help, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. What you're building together, that's a blessing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The relief on Clara's face was palpable. "Thank you, Reverend. Some people seem to think it's too soon." "Some people would think it's too soon if you waited 5 years, the Reverend said dryly. "There's always someone who'll find fault. But I knew Thomas and Mary. I know they'd approve of this match. They'd want their children raised by 2 people who love them and love each other." He leaned forward. "When were you planning to marry?" "We thought perhaps Christmas," Caleb said. "Give the children something joyful." "Christmas it is, then. I'll be honored to perform the ceremony." Reverend Thomas stood, shook both their hands. "And don't you worry about the gossips. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough. In the meantime, hold your heads high. You're doing the right thing." Walking out of the church, Clara's hand in his, Caleb felt lighter than he had in days. The Reverend's blessing mattered, not because Caleb cared much about social approval, but because it clearly meant something to Clara. Feel better? He asked as they loaded the children into the wagon. Much better. Clara squeezed his hand. Thank you for not letting me talk us into waiting. Thank you for saying yes in the first place. That afternoon, they began planning in earnest. Clara moved through the house, making lists of what needed to be done, what needed to be cleaned, what needed to be prepared. The children caught her excitement, following her from room to room with suggestions and questions. Will you wear a white dress? Annie asked. I don't think so, sweetheart. White is for first-time brides, really. I'll probably wear my good blue dress. But that's boring, Annie protested. You should wear something pretty, something special. Clara laughed. The blue dress is pretty. Not pretty enough, Annie insisted. Not for marrying Uncle Caleb. Later, when the children were occupied elsewhere, Clara brought up something that had been worrying her. Caleb, where will I sleep? After we're married, I mean. It was a fair question. The house had 3 bedrooms upstairs, the children's rooms and Caleb's. The spare room downstairs was tiny, barely more than a closet with a bed. We'll share my room, Caleb said, then felt his face heat. I mean, that's what married people do, share a room. I know that. Clara was blushing too. I just wanted to make sure you'd thought about it, about everything that comes with marriage. They were dancing around the subject, both too awkward to speak directly about the intimacies of married life. Caleb cleared his throat. I've thought about it. Have you? Yes? Clara's blush deepened. And I'm looking forward to... She stopped, laughed at their mutual discomfort. We're both adults. This shouldn't be so difficult to discuss. We'll figure it out, Caleb said. Together, like everything else. Together, Clara agreed, and the word felt like a promise. The week before Christmas brought an unexpected cold snap. Temperatures plummeted, and a genuine snowstorm rolled across the prairie, dumping several inches of snow and making the roads nearly impassable. Caleb kept close to the ranch, worried about the cattle, about the pipes freezing, about keeping the house warm enough for the children. On Tuesday, he made the difficult trip to town for supplies, bundling the children against the cold. The general store was crowded with other ranchers and farmers making similar preparations. Caleb was loading flour and sugar into the wagon when he heard a familiar voice. Caleb Rowan? Is that really you? He turned to find Jack Morrison, an old friend from his drifting days. Jack was weathered and grinning, his face lined from years under the sun. Jack, what are you doing in Redemption? Could ask you the same thing. Last I heard you were down in San Antonio. Jack's eyes went to the wagon, to the supplies suitable for a family. Settling down, are we? Something like that. Caleb explained quickly. His brother's death, the children, the ranch. Jack's expression grew somber. I'm sorry about Thomas. He was a good man. Jack paused. But you, taking care of kids, running a ranch? Never thought I'd see the day Caleb Rowan put down roots. Neither did I, Caleb admitted. But here we are. Here you are indeed, Jack studied him. You look good, though, tired, but good. Happy, maybe? Maybe I am. Well, I'll be damned. Jack clapped him on the shoulder. Good for you, Caleb. Good for you. They talked for a few more minutes, catching up on mutual acquaintances and old times. When Jack finally moved on, Caleb felt an odd sense of closure. That life, the drifting, the constant movement, the freedom that had once seemed so important, felt like it belonged to someone else now. He finished loading the wagon and collected the children from the schoolhouse, where Clara had kept them warm while he shopped. The drive home was slow, the wagon wheels cutting through fresh snow, but Caleb didn't mind. Rose sat pressed against his side, chattering about the snowman they'd build when they got home. Sam and Annie were in the back, throwing snowballs at each other and laughing. Clara sat on his other side, her shoulder touching his, radiating warmth. This was his life now. This was what mattered. That evening, after supper, while Clara helped Rose with her bedtime routine upstairs, Annie approached Caleb with a serious expression. Uncle Caleb, can I ask you something? Of course. Annie twisted her hands together, nervous. When you marry Miss Clara, will you forget about Mama and Papa? The question caught Caleb off guard. He set down the book he'd been reading, gave Annie his full attention. No, sweetheart, never. Your Mama and Papa will always be part of this family. We'll always remember them, always honor their memory. But won't it be different with Miss Clara here? It'll be different, yes. But different doesn't mean forgetting. Caleb pulled Annie onto his lap. Your mama and papa loved you so much. They wanted you to be happy and safe and cared for. Clara does that. She makes this house feel like a home again. I think your parents would be grateful to her for that. Do you think they can see us? From heaven? I hope so. And if they can, I think they're smiling right now. Because you and Sam and Rose are going to be okay. More than okay. Annie was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she asked, Do you love Miss Clara the way Papa loved Mama? It was a child's question, direct and uncomplicated. Caleb considered his answer carefully. I think I love her differently. What your Papa and Mama had, they grew up together, built a life from scratch. Clara and I, we came together because we both needed something, but that doesn't make it less real. I love her, Annie. Truly. Good, Annie said decisively, because she loves you too. I can tell. How can you tell? The way she looks at you when you're not watching, the way she smiles when you walk into a room, the way she… Annie stopped, suddenly shy. I just know. The way I knew Mama and Papa loved each other. Caleb hugged his niece close, overwhelmed by her perception and her acceptance. You're a smart girl, Annie. Your mama would be proud of how brave you've been. I'm not brave. I'm scared sometimes. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the hard thing anyway. You've had to be brave every day since your mama and papa died. That takes real courage. Annie snuggled against him. Will you still be my uncle after you marry Miss Clara? Or will you be my papa? The question made Caleb's throat tight. I'll be whatever you need me to be. If you want to keep calling me Uncle Caleb, that's fine. If someday you want to call me Papa, that's fine too. There's no rush, no pressure, whatever feels right to you. I think Uncle Caleb is good for now, Annie said after a moment's thought. But maybe someday. Maybe Papa, if that's okay. That would be more than okay, Caleb managed. That would be an honor. They sat together in comfortable silence until Clara came downstairs, having successfully gotten Rose to sleep. She took in the scene, Caleb holding Annie, both of them peaceful, and smiled. Looks like someone's ready for bed, she said gently. Annie nodded, sliding off Caleb's lap. She moved to Clara, hugged her goodnight. I'm glad you're going to be our mama, she whispered. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm glad too, sweetheart. After Annie had gone upstairs, Clara sat down beside Caleb on the worn sofa. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him with a sigh. Long day? He asked. Long week, but good. Clara tilted her head to look up at him. Caleb, are you sure about all of this? About getting married so quickly? About taking on a ready-made family when you could have had… Don't, Caleb interrupted. Don't second-guess this, I'm sure. More sure than I've been about anything in my life. Even with the gossip? Even with people judging us? Especially with all that. Because it means we're choosing each other despite the obstacles. That's worth something. Clara smiled, settled back against him. 5 more days. 5 more days, Caleb confirmed. And then you're stuck with me. I can think of worse fates. They sat together as the fire burned low, planning details for the ceremony, talking about how they'd arrange the house after Clara moved in permanently, dreaming about the future. Outside, snow continued to fall, muffling the world in white silence. Inside, the house was warm, and the future felt bright with possibility. The next day brought unexpected visitors. Caleb was in the barn, checking on the horses, when he heard wagon wheels crunching through snow. He emerged to find a wagon loaded with furniture pulling up to the house, driven by Jim Cooper, the owner of the general store. Mr. Rowan, Jim called out, got a delivery for you. I didn't order any furniture, Caleb said, confused. No, but folks in town did. When they heard you were getting married, several families got together and put in for a proper bed frame and a new table and chairs. Said every new couple deserves decent furniture. Jim began unloading. There's also a quilt Mrs. Cooper made and some kitchen things, and… Caleb stood speechless as the wagon revealed its contents. A beautiful oak bed frame, clearly handmade, a table with 6 matching chairs, dishes and cookware, blankets and linens, all gifts from the townspeople. Clara, who'd heard the commotion, came out of the house. Her hand flew to her mouth when she saw the furniture. "Oh my." "Seems not everyone disapproves," Jim said with a wink. "Plenty of folks are happy for you both. They just aren't as loud as the disapprovers." Over the next hour, several more wagons arrived. Families brought food, gifts, words of encouragement. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry, brought a beautiful embroidered tablecloth. The Johnsons brought a rocking chair for the porch. Even old Mr. Wheeler, who rarely spoke to anyone, arrived with a cradle he'd carved himself. "For when you need it," he said gruffly, then left before they could thank him properly. By midday, the house had been transformed. The bedroom upstairs now had a proper bed instead of Caleb's old rope frame. The kitchen had a new table that didn't wobble. The children had new quilts for their beds. Everywhere Caleb looked, he saw evidence of community support, of people who'd chosen to show kindness rather than judgment. "I don't know what to say," Clara whispered, looking around at the abundance. "I had no idea." "Neither did I," Caleb admitted. "Guess we focus too much on the negative voices and not enough on the positive ones." That evening, they wrote thank you notes to everyone who'd contributed, the children helping to address envelopes and draw little pictures in the margins. It was a good reminder that for every Mrs. Henderson with her criticism, there were 3 families with generous hearts. The days before Christmas passed in a blur of preparation. The children helped Clara bake cookies and bread. Caleb cut down a small pine tree and brought it inside, where Annie and Sam decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. The house smelled of cinnamon and pine, of wood smoke and fresh bread, of hope and new beginnings. On December 23rd, Clara arrived with her belongings, a modest collection of clothes, books, and personal items that fit into 2 trunks. Caleb and the children helped carry everything upstairs to what would now be their shared bedroom. "It's really happening," Clara said, standing in the doorway and looking at the room that held both her trunk and Caleb's things. "Tomorrow, I'll be your wife." "Having second thoughts?" Caleb asked, though he could see from her face that she wasn't. Not even for a moment. Clara turned to him, took his hands. "I'm nervous, yes, but not uncertain. You?" "Same." Caleb squeezed her hands. "Clara, I want you to know I'm going to do everything I can to make you happy, to be a good husband, a good father to these children. I know I'm not perfect." "Stop," Clara said gently. "I'm not looking for perfect. I'm looking for real, for partnership, for love. And that's what we have." That night, Clara slept in the spare room for the last time. Tomorrow she'd move upstairs permanently, sharing Caleb's room, sharing his life, sharing everything. Caleb lay awake long into the night, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about the turns his life had taken. 4 months ago, he'd been a drifter. Now he was about to become a husband and father. The transformation felt both sudden and inevitable, like he'd been moving toward this point his entire life without knowing it. He thought about Thomas, buried up on the hill, wondered what his brother would think of all this. Would he approve of Caleb marrying so soon? Would he be happy that Clara was taking care of his children? Would he understand that grief and joy could coexist, that moving forward didn't mean forgetting? "I hope I'm doing right by them," Caleb whispered into the darkness. "I hope I'm making you proud." No answer came, but Caleb felt a sense of peace nonetheless. Thomas had been a practical man. He would have wanted his children cared for, his ranch preserved, his brother happy. Clara accomplished all of that. Thomas would have approved. Caleb was sure of it. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold. The sun rose over the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold, promising a beautiful day. Caleb was up before dawn, too nervous to sleep. He built up the fire, made coffee, stood at the window watching the world wake up. Today he would marry Clara Bennett. Today their makeshift family would become official. Today everything would change, and for once Caleb was ready for the change, eager for it even. The children woke early, too excited to stay in bed. Annie appeared in the kitchen first, already dressed in her Sunday best, a dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her. "It's your wedding day," she said, as if Caleb might have forgotten. "It is indeed. Are you nervous?" "A little. Are you?" Annie considered this. "A little, but good nervous, like when you're waiting for something wonderful to happen." That's exactly it, Caleb said. Good nervous. Sam and Rose came downstairs shortly after, and they all had breakfast together. Eggs and toast that Caleb managed not to burn. A small victory. Clara arrived mid-morning, driven by Reverend Thomas himself, who'd offered to escort her. Thought you might appreciate an extra set of hands, the Reverend said. Getting a bride ready is no small task. Clara looked beautiful even in her ordinary clothes, her face flushed with cold and excitement. She'd brought her good dress with her, the blue one she'd mentioned, though Caleb suspected Annie was right and it wasn't fancy enough for the occasion. But when Clara emerged an hour later, dressed and ready, Caleb's breath caught in his throat. She'd done something to the dress, added lace at the collar and cuffs, pinned her hair up with flowers that Mrs. Cooper must have provided. She looked radiant, nervous, perfect. You're beautiful, he said, and meant it with everything in him. Clara blushed. You look rather handsome yourself. Caleb had borrowed a suit from Jim Cooper, who was roughly his size. It fit well enough, and he'd shaved and combed his hair with more care than usual. He felt awkward and formal and happy all at once. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the church. As the appointed time approached, Caleb found his nerves increasing. What if he forgot his vows? What if Clara changed her mind at the last moment? What if— Stop worrying, Annie said, patting his hand. Miss Clara loves you. Everything's going to be perfect. Out of the mouths of babes. Caleb took a deep breath, nodded, and helped load everyone into the wagon for the drive to town. The church was fuller than Caleb had expected. Word had spread about the wedding, and curiosity, if nothing else, had drawn a crowd. He recognized faces from town, neighbors from surrounding ranches, even Jack Morrison, his old friend, sitting in the back with a grin on his weathered face. Mrs. Henderson was there too, he noticed, sitting in the middle pews with her son Jimmy. She didn't look disapproving anymore, just resigned, maybe even a little wistful. Caleb took his place at the front of the church, Reverend Thomas beside him, Sam and Annie flanking him like small attendants. Rose sat in the front pew, swinging her legs and humming to herself, too young to understand the gravity of the moment, but happy nonetheless. Then the church doors opened and Clara walked in. She had no one to give her away, no father to escort her down the aisle, so she walked alone. But she didn't look alone. She looked strong and certain and beautiful. Her eyes locked on Caleb's, a smile playing at her lips. Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. This woman, who'd walked into his life carrying bread and kindness, was about to become his wife. The enormousness of it, the rightness of it, overwhelmed him. Clara reached the front of the church, took his hands. Hers were trembling slightly. Dearly beloved, Reverend Thomas began, and the familiar words washed over Caleb like a blessing. He barely heard most of the ceremony, too focused on Clara's face, on the tears shining in her eyes, on the way her hands gripped his like she'd never let go. Then it was time for vows. Caleb, the Reverend prompted, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Caleb said, his voice steady and sure. I absolutely do. Clara, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part? I do, Clara whispered, then louder. I do. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Reverend Thomas beamed. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. Caleb cupped Clara's face in his hands, leaned down, and kissed her softly. The church erupted in applause and cheers, the children loudest of all. When they broke apart, both blushing, Clara was crying and laughing at the same time. Hello, husband, she said. Hello, wife, Caleb replied, and the word felt like magic. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, to be met by well-wishers and congratulations. Even Mrs. Henderson offered a grudging smile and words of blessing. People pressed gifts into their hands, jars of preserves, a set of napkins, a wooden spoon carved with their initials, and the date. Outside the church, Snow began to fall again, light flakes drifting down like a benediction. The children danced around them, catching snowflakes on their tongues. Clara laughed, her face tilted to the sky, and Caleb thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. They'd planned a simple celebration back at the ranch, just close friends and neighbors, nothing elaborate. But as wagons began following them home, Caleb realized the celebration might be larger than anticipated. Half the town seemed to be coming, the house filled with people, with food that various families had brought, with music when someone produced a fiddle. The new table was laden with dishes, roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh bread and butter, pies and cakes and cookies. It was a feast, a celebration, a community coming together to bless a new marriage. Caleb and Clara moved through it all in a daze, accepting congratulations, thanking people for their generosity, trying to remember everyone's names and keep track of which gift came from whom. Through it all, they kept finding each other's eyes across the crowded room, sharing private smiles that spoke of anticipation and joy. As evening fell and guests began departing, Jim Cooper pulled Caleb aside. "You done good, Caleb. Thomas would be proud. Mary, too." "Thank you, Jim, for everything. The furniture, the support. That's what community does. We take care of our own." Jim clapped him on the shoulder. "You're one of us now. Don't forget that." Finally, blissfully, the last guest departed. The children, exhausted from excitement, had already been put to bed by Mrs. Cooper before she left. The house was quiet, the lamps turned low, the fire burning down to embers. Caleb and Clara stood in the kitchen, surveying the remnants of the celebration, dishes that needed washing, furniture slightly askew, bits of food and ribbons scattered about. "We should clean this up," Clara said, but she didn't move. "It can wait until morning," Caleb replied. He held out his hand. "Come here." Clara moved into his arms, and they stood there in the quiet kitchen, swaying slightly, although there was no music. She felt warm and solid and real against him, his wife now in truth and law. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked quietly. "Happy, scared, overwhelmed, complete." Clara pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "All of it at once." "Me too." Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Clara, I meant what I said in my vows. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret this decision." "I won't regret it. I know that already." She smiled. "Though you might, when you realize what a stubborn woman you've married." "I think I already know that. I married you anyway." They kissed then, longer and deeper than the brief kiss in the church, a kiss that spoke of promise and passion and the beginning of their shared life. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara took Caleb's hand. "Take me upstairs," she whispered. "Take me home." And Caleb did, leading his wife up the stairs to their bedroom, to the life they would build together, to whatever future awaited them. Behind them, the house settled into peaceful silence, holding this new family in its embrace as snow continued to fall outside, covering the Texas prairie in clean white promise. Morning came too early and not early enough. Caleb woke to find Clara still sleeping beside him, her hair loose on the pillow, her face peaceful in the pale dawn light filtering through the curtains. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, marveling at the simple fact of her presence. His wife. The words still felt strange and wonderful in his mind. Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him watching her, a slow smile spread across her face. "Good morning, husband." "Good morning, wife." Caleb reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years." Clara stretched, then suddenly sat up. "The children. I should check on them." "They're probably still asleep. It was a late night." But even as he spoke, they heard footsteps on the stairs, then Rose's voice calling out, "Mama Clara? Uncle Caleb? Are you awake?" Clara's eyes met Caleb's, and they both laughed softly. "So much for sleeping in," she said, reaching for her robe. "Come in, sweetheart." Rose pushed open the door, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle. She climbed onto the bed between them without hesitation. "You're really married now." "We really are," Clara confirmed, pulling the little girl into her lap. "Does that mean you live here forever now?" "Forever and ever." Rose considered this, then nodded decisively. "Good. I was worried you might leave." The simple honesty of it made Caleb's chest tighten. How many nights had Rose lain awake worrying about losing another person she loved? "Mama Clara's not going anywhere," he said firmly. "None of us are. We're a family now." Annie and Sam appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. They looked uncertain, as if they weren't sure whether they were allowed to interrupt this first morning. "Come here," Clara said, opening her arms. "All of you." They piled onto the bed. 3 children, 2 adults, all tangled together in a heap of limbs and laughter. It was chaotic and perfect, and exactly what a family should be. "Can we have pancakes?" Sam asked hopefully. "Mama Clara makes the best pancakes." "I suppose I do now that I'm Mama Clara officially," Clara said with a laugh. "All right, pancakes it is. Everyone get dressed and come down to the kitchen." The children scrambled off the bed and thundered back to their rooms. Clara stood, tying her robe more securely. "Welcome to married life," she said to Caleb. "No privacy and constant demands for pancakes." "Sounds perfect to me," Caleb replied, and meant it. The first week of their marriage passed in a blur of adjustment and joy. Clara's presence in the house changed everything in ways both large and small. Meals appeared on time and were actually edible. Clothes got mended before they became unwearable. The house stayed cleaner, more organized, more lived in. But more than the practical improvements, there was a warmth now, a sense of rightness that had been missing even during Clara's Saturday visits. She was here to stay. That made all the difference. The children blossomed under her constant presence. Rose, who'd been so clingy and anxious, began to relax and play more freely. Sam's nightmares stopped almost entirely. Annie, who'd been trying so hard to be the little mother, finally allowed herself to be a child again. And Caleb found himself happier than he'd been in years, maybe ever. Coming in from ranch work to find Clara in the kitchen, humming as she cooked, sitting by the fire in the evening while she read to the children, lying beside her each night, talking about the day, making plans for the future, learning the contours of partnership and love. It wasn't all perfect, of course. There were adjustments to make, conflicts to navigate. Clara had her own ways of doing things, and they didn't always align with Caleb's habits. She wanted the barn door closed at night to keep the heat in. He preferred it slightly open for ventilation. She thought the children should have a strict bedtime. He was more flexible. She organized the kitchen cupboards in a way that made sense to her but left Caleb unable to find anything. They had their first real argument 2 weeks after the wedding over something absurdly small. Caleb had tracked mud across the clean kitchen floor. An accident. He was distracted by a problem with one of the horses, and Clara had snapped at him with uncharacteristic sharpness. "I just mopped that floor this morning, Caleb. Can you please pay attention to where you're walking?" "I'm sorry, I didn't notice. I'll clean it up." "You never notice. I swear you could walk through a hurricane and not realize it was raining." The unfairness of that stung. "That's not true. I notice plenty. I just have a lot on my mind with the ranch and—" "Oh, so the ranch is more important than keeping the house livable?" "I didn't say that. Don't put words in my mouth." "I'm not putting words anywhere. I'm just tired of cleaning up after you like you're one of the children." They stared at each other across the muddy floor, both breathing hard, both aware that this argument had escalated beyond reason. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "You're right. I should have been more careful. I'm sorry." The tension in Clara's shoulders eased. "No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have snapped at you. It's just, I'm trying so hard to make this house perfect, to prove I can do this, and sometimes I forget that perfect isn't the point." "What is the point?" Clara moved closer to him, careful to avoid the mud. "The point is us, being together, building a life, not having a spotless floor." Caleb pulled her into his arms, not caring about the mud on his boots anymore. "I'll try to be more careful. And you try to be less hard on yourself, deal?" "Deal." They cleaned up the mud together, and afterward Caleb realized something important. They'd had their first fight as a married couple, and they'd survived it, more than survived. They'd learned from it. That boded well for the future. January brought harsh weather and new challenges. A cold snap killed 2 of the cattle, a loss Caleb could ill afford. The roof over the barn developed a leak that needed fixing in weather too cold for comfort. Rose came down with a bad cough that had Clara worried and hovering. But there were good things too. The children's grades at school improved with Clara there to help them every evening. Annie started reading books well beyond her age level. Sam discovered a talent for arithmetic. Rose, despite her cough, seemed happier than she'd been since her parents died. And slowly, steadily, Caleb was beginning to turn the ranch around. He'd sold off the cattle that weren't producing, kept only the strong breeding stock. He'd negotiated with the bank for better terms on Thomas's debts. He'd found a buyer for some of the less productive land on the eastern edge of the property. It was hard work and would take years to fully recover, but for the first time since arriving, Caleb felt like the ranch had a future. One evening in late January, Clara came to him with news that made his heart stop. They were alone in the kitchen, the children already in bed. Clara had been quieter than usual all day, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she worked. Now she sat down across from him at the table, folded her hands, and took a deep breath. "Caleb, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made him nervous. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. She paused, searching for words. "I'm pregnant." The world seemed to stop. Caleb stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. We're going to have a baby?" "Yes." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Are you happy? I know it's fast. I know we've only been married a month, but—" Caleb was around the table in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms. "Happy? Clara, I'm thrilled. Terrified, but thrilled." He pulled back to look at her face. "When?" "I think probably August, early September." Clara laughed through her tears. "I wasn't certain until today. Mrs. Henderson's sister is a midwife, and I asked her to examine me. She confirmed it. A baby. Their baby." Caleb felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Joy and fear and wonder, all mixed together. "How do you feel about it?" "Scared," Clara admitted. "My mother had a difficult time with childbirth. She almost died having me. And I'm 30 years old, which is old for a first baby. But Caleb, I'm also so happy. I never thought I'd have children of my own. I'd resigned myself to being the spinster school teacher. And now you're going to be a mother. You already are a mother, to Annie and Sam and Rose. This baby will be lucky to have you." "We haven't told the children yet," Clara said. "I wanted you to know first, but we should tell them soon. They'll figure it out eventually anyway." They decided to wait a few more weeks, until Clara was past the most dangerous early months. But keeping the secret proved harder than anticipated. Clara's morning sickness was severe, leaving her pale and exhausted. She had to stop teaching, couldn't keep up with the household work the way she wanted to. The children noticed, of course, and worried. "Is Mama Clara sick?" Annie asked Caleb one morning, her voice small and scared. "Like Mama and Papa were?" The question chilled him. "No, sweetheart. She's not sick like that. She's going to have a baby. You're going to have a new brother or sister." Annie's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really, but you can't tell Sam and Rose yet. Mama Clara wants to tell them herself when she's feeling better." "A baby?" Annie breathed. "We're going to have a baby in the house." "We are? What do you think about that?" Annie considered this seriously. "I think it's good. Babies are nice, and it means Mama Clara really is staying forever, right? Because mothers don't leave their babies." The logic was heartbreaking in its simplicity. Annie was still so afraid of losing someone else. "That's right," Caleb confirmed. "Mama Clara is staying forever. I promise you that." By mid-February, Clara was feeling better, and they gathered the children to share the news officially. Sam was excited, immediately full of questions about whether it would be a boy or girl, and when exactly it would arrive. Rose seemed uncertain what a baby even meant, but was happy because everyone else was happy. "Will you still love us?" Annie asked quietly. "When the baby comes?" Clara knelt down, took Annie's hands. "Oh, sweetheart, of course. Having a new baby doesn't mean we love you any less. Love isn't like pie where there's only so much to go around. It's like a fire. The more you add to it, the brighter it burns. This baby will just make our family bigger and fuller. You'll always be our first daughter. Nothing will change that." Annie seemed satisfied with that answer, and gradually the household adjusted to the reality of a coming baby. Clara began sewing tiny clothes. Caleb brought down the cradle Mr. Wheeler had given them, cleaned it up, placed it in their bedroom. The children drew pictures of what they thought the baby would look like. It was during this time, in early March, that the fever came. It started with Rose. She'd had a cough off and on all winter, nothing unusual for a 3-year-old. But one morning Clara went to wake her and found the little girl burning with fever, her skin hot and dry to the touch. "Caleb!" Clara's voice was sharp with fear. "Caleb, come quick!" He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding. One look at Rose's flushed face and glassy eyes told him this was serious. This was the same fever that had taken Thomas and Mary. "Get the doctor," Clara said, already sponging Rose's forehead with cool water. "Hurry!" Caleb rode to town faster than was safe on the icy roads, pushed Dr. Wilson's door open without knocking. "My niece. She has the fever, the same one that killed my brother." Dr. Wilson grabbed his bag. He was an older man, worn down by years of fighting battles he couldn't always win. "How long has she been sick?" "Just this morning. Please, you have to help her." They made the return journey quickly, arriving to find Clara still with Rose, singing softly to the little girl, who tossed and turned in fevered delirium. Annie and Sam stood in the doorway, their faces white with fear. Dr. Wilson examined Rose thoroughly, his expression growing grave. "It's the fever, all right. Same strain that went through here last summer. Hard to say how bad it'll get." "What can we do?" Caleb asked. "Keep her cool. Force fluids if you can get them down. Watch for seizures. Sometimes the fever spikes and causes convulsions. Beyond that," the doctor shook his head. "Pray, Mr. Rowan. That's about all anyone can do." After the doctor left, Caleb found Clara in the kitchen, her hands braced against the counter, her whole body shaking. "Not again," she whispered. "Please, God, not again." He went to her, held her. "She's going to be fine. She's strong. She'll fight this." Thomas and Mary were strong too. It didn't matter. Clara turned to face him, her eyes red. "Caleb, I can't lose her. I can't lose any of them." "You won't. We won't." But even as he said it, Caleb felt the cold fingers of fear wrapping around his heart. He'd already lost his brother to this fever. The thought of losing Rose, of watching another person he loved slip away, was unbearable. They took turns sitting with Rose that day and into the night. The fever climbed higher. The little girl cried out for her mother, for Mary, not understanding that Mary was gone, that Clara was here now. Clara sang to her, bathed her forehead, held her when she thrashed. By the second day, Rose was worse. She wouldn't eat, could barely drink. The fever showed no signs of breaking. Dr. Wilson came again, shook his head grimly. "I've seen cases go either way at this point. Could break soon, or it could get worse before it gets better." Annie and Sam were terrified, kept out of the room for fear they'd catch it too. They huddled together in the kitchen, speaking in whispers, their eyes huge with fear. Caleb tried to reassure them, but the words felt hollow. On the third night, the fever spiked. Rose began convulsing, her small body rigid, her eyes rolled back. Clara screamed for Caleb, who came running. Together they held Rose through the seizure, Clara sobbing, Caleb praying with a desperation he'd never felt before. "Please," he whispered, "please don't take her. Take me instead. Take anything else, but not her." The seizure passed. Rose lay limp and still, her breathing shallow. Clara bent over her, listening to her heartbeat, her own tears falling on the child's face. "She's still with us. She's still fighting." They stayed with her all that night, neither sleeping, both watching for any change. The house was silent except for Rose's labored breathing and the ticking of the clock. Hour after hour passed with no improvement but no worsening either. Dawn broke on the 4th day, gray and cold. Caleb stood at the window, watching the sun struggle to break through heavy clouds. He was exhausted, terrified, running on nothing but fear and hope. "Caleb?" Clara's voice was strange, high and thin. Caleb, feel her forehead. He moved to the bed, placed his hand on Rose's brow. It was cooler, noticeably cooler than it had been hours ago. "The fever's breaking," he breathed. "Oh, thank God." Clara collapsed against him, sobbing with relief. Thank God! Thank God! They watched as, slowly but surely, Rose's fever continued to drop. By mid-morning, she was cool to the touch. By afternoon, she was sleeping peacefully instead of thrashing. By evening, she woke and asked for water in a thin but clear voice. "Mama Clara," she whispered, "I don't feel good." Clara laughed through fresh tears. "I know, baby, but you're going to be okay now. You're going to be just fine." Dr. Wilson, making another house call, confirmed that the worst had passed. "She's a fighter, that one, but she'll be weak for a while. Needs rest and good food to build her strength back up." As the doctor prepared to leave, he pulled Caleb aside. "Mr. Rowan, I need to tell you, your wife shouldn't have been exposed to this. Not in her condition. The fever can affect unborn babies. You need to watch her carefully." Cold dread washed over Caleb. In the crisis with Rose, he'd forgotten about Clara's pregnancy, about the danger she'd been in every moment she spent caring for the sick child. Will she be all right, the baby? Hard to say. She didn't catch the fever, which is good, but stress and exhaustion can cause problems too. She needs rest now, just like Rose. Can you handle things for a while? Yes, Caleb said, though he had no idea how he'd manage. Yes, I'll take care of everything. Over the next week, both Rose and Clara recovered slowly. Caleb threw himself into caring for them, for Annie and Sam, for the household. He cooked meals that were barely edible but nutritious enough. He cleaned and laundered and kept the fire going. He read to Rose when she was well enough to listen, helped Annie with her schoolwork, played quietly with Sam. And at night, he held Clara while she cried from exhaustion and relief and hormones and fear. "I was so scared," she whispered. "So scared we'd lose her." "I know, I was too." Caleb stroked her hair. "But she's okay. You're okay. The baby's okay. We all made it through." "This time," Clara said. "But Caleb, what about next time? What if the fever comes back? What if one of the other children gets sick? What if—" "We can't live in fear of what might happen," Caleb interrupted gently. "We can only deal with what does happen, and we do it together." Clara was quiet for a moment. "When I was sitting with Rose when she was at her worst, I kept thinking about Thomas and Mary, about how they must have felt knowing they were dying and leaving their children behind. It was unbearable to imagine. They knew I'd take care of them," Caleb said. "They trusted me with what mattered most, just like I trust you with everything that matters to me." "Do you?" Clara looked up at him in the darkness. "Trust me?" "With my life, with the children's lives, with everything." She settled back against him with a sigh. "I love you, Caleb Rowan, even when you track mud across my clean floors." He laughed softly. "I love you too, even when you organize my tools in ways that make no sense." Life gradually returned to normal, or what passed for normal, in the Rowan household. Rose recovered fully, though she was more clingy than before, often seeking out Clara or Caleb for reassurance. The other children seemed to have been affected by the scare too, more grateful for what they had, more aware of how quickly things could change. By April, Clara's pregnancy was becoming visible. She'd stopped teaching permanently, focusing all her energy on the household and the children. The ranch was doing better. Caleb had sold another section of marginal land and used the money to pay down more of Thomas's debts. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they were heading in the right direction. One warm evening, with the windows open to let in the spring breeze, they sat together on the porch after the children had gone to bed. Clara had her hand on her swollen belly, a small smile on her face. "The baby's moving," she said. "Do you want to feel?" Caleb placed his hand where hers had been, felt the flutter of movement beneath his palm. His child. His and Clara's. The wonder of it struck him anew. "That's our baby." "That's our baby," Clara confirmed. "Caleb, I've been thinking. We should tell the children they can visit Thomas and Mary's graves, pay their respects. They haven't been since the funeral, and I think it might be good for them. Help them remember their parents, talk to them in a way." It was a good idea, though the thought of going back to those graves made Caleb's chest tight. "All right, we can go this Sunday after church." Sunday came bright and clear. After the church service, they drove back to the ranch and walked up the hill to where Thomas and Mary were buried. Someone, maybe Reverend Thomas, had placed flowers on the graves recently. The wooden crosses Caleb had made still stood straight, though weather had begun to wear at them. He'd need to replace them with something more permanent soon. Annie and Sam stood solemnly before their parents' graves. Rose, too young to really understand, picked wildflowers nearby. Clara stood back, giving the children space to grieve. "Hi, Mama. Hi, Papa," Annie said softly. "We miss you a lot, but we're okay. Uncle Caleb takes good care of us, and we have Mama Clara now. She's really nice. She makes good pancakes and reads us stories, and she's going to have a baby. You'd like her, I think." Sam nodded along with everything Annie said, then added his own thoughts. "I'm doing good in school. Miss Bennett, Mama Clara, she taught me my numbers. And Uncle Caleb is teaching me about the ranch. I'm going to be a rancher like Papa when I grow up." Caleb felt his throat tighten. Clara slipped her hand into his, squeezed gently. After a few more minutes, the children moved away from the graves, seemingly satisfied. They ran off to explore the hilltop, chasing each other through the grass. Clara and Caleb stood together before the graves. "Thomas," Caleb said quietly, "Mary, I hope you can see them. See how they're growing, how they're healing. I'm doing my best by them. I'm trying to give them the life you wanted for them." He paused. "I married Clara. I know it was fast, but it was the right thing. She loves them like they were her own. She loves me. We're building something good here, something that will last. I hope that makes you happy." Clara added her own words. "I promise to love them always, to keep them safe, to honor your memory, and make sure they never forget you. You raised wonderful children, and I'm grateful to be part of their lives now." They stood in silence for a moment, then turned to head back down the hill. Caleb felt lighter somehow, as if Thomas had heard and approved, as if this visit had closed one chapter and opened another. That night, lying in bed with Clara curled against him, her hand on her growing belly, Caleb thought about how far they'd all come. From grief and chaos to this, a real family with love and hope and a future stretching out before them. It hadn't been easy. There would be more challenges ahead, but they would face them together. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked sleepily. "About how lucky I am," Caleb replied. "About how you walked into my life at exactly the right moment." "I think we walked into each other's lives," Clara corrected. "I needed you as much as you needed me." "Maybe so." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "But I'm still the lucky one." Clara laughed softly. "We're both lucky. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow's another day and it starts early on a ranch." "Yes, ma'am." They drifted off together, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of loss and built something beautiful from the pieces. Outside, the Texas night stretched vast and starlit, full of promise and possibility, watching over the Rowan Ranch and the family that called it home. Spring turned to summer with the kind of relentless heat that made Texas famous. The prairie grass turned golden, the creek ran low, and Clara grew rounder with each passing week. By July, she was large enough that simple tasks became difficult. Bending to pick up Rose left her breathless. Standing at the stove for long periods made her back ache. The heat seemed to affect her more than anyone else, leaving her flushed and uncomfortable. Caleb watched her struggle with growing concern. "Maybe you should rest more," he suggested one sweltering afternoon, finding her in the garden despite his repeated requests that she stay inside during the hottest part of the day. "I can't just sit around doing nothing," Clara protested, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "There's too much to do. The vegetables need tending, the laundry needs washing, the children need their mother to take care of herself," Caleb interrupted gently. He took the basket from her hands. "Come inside, I'll finish this. You have your own work to do. Nothing that can't wait." He guided her toward the house, one hand at the small of her back. "Clara, please. You're 8 months pregnant in the middle of a heat wave. You need to rest." She didn't argue further, which told him how exhausted she really was. Inside, he settled her in the rocking chair by the window where she could catch whatever breeze existed, brought her cool water, and insisted she stay put. The children, sensing their mother's discomfort, tried to help in their own ways. Annie took over more of the cooking, following Clara's instructions carefully. Sam fetched water whenever Clara needed it, making trips to the well without complaint. Rose, too young to do much, simply stayed close, patting Clara's belly and talking to the baby. "When is it coming out?" Rose asked one evening, her small hand pressed against Clara's stomach. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon. Will it hurt?" Clara exchanged a glance with Caleb over Rose's head. "A little bit, but it's worth it to meet the baby." "I'll hold your hand," Rose announced solemnly. "That's what you do when someone is hurt. You hold their hand." Clara's eyes filled with tears. Everything made her cry these days. "Thank you, baby. That's very kind." As August approached, Caleb found himself increasingly anxious. He'd never been present for a birth before, had no idea what to expect. Mrs. Henderson's sister, Martha, who served as the local midwife, had agreed to attend the birth. She'd examined Clara a few times and pronounced everything normal, but normal didn't stop Caleb from worrying. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked Clara one night as they lay in bed, unable to sleep in the oppressive heat. "Then Martha will know what to do. She's delivered hundreds of babies." "But your mother, you said she had a difficult time." Clara rolled onto her side to face him, her belly an awkward bulk between them. "My mother was very small, and I was a large baby. Martha says I'm built well for childbearing, whatever that means. And women have been doing this since the beginning of time, Caleb. I'll be fine." "You can't know that." "No," Clara admitted. "I can't, but I choose to believe it anyway. And you should too, because I need you to be strong when the time comes, not falling apart with worry." She was right, of course, but knowing she was right didn't stop the fear that coiled in his gut every time he thought about what was coming. The first week of August brought no relief from the heat. The cattle were suffering, clustering in whatever shade they could find. The garden was struggling despite Clara's best efforts. Even the chickens seemed lethargic, producing fewer eggs. It was on August 7th, a Wednesday, that Clara woke before dawn with the first pains. Caleb jerked awake when she gripped his arm, her fingers digging in hard. "Caleb, it's time." He was out of bed in an instant, fumbling in the dark for his pants. "Are you sure?" "Maybe it's just—" "I'm sure." Clara's voice was tight. "You need to get Martha, now." Caleb dressed in record time, his hands shaking as he buttoned his shirt. "Will you be all right until I get back?" "Yes, just hurry." He raced to the barn, saddled his horse with fingers that wouldn't quite work properly, and rode through the pre-dawn darkness toward town. Martha lived on the far side of Redemption, a 30-minute ride even when pushing hard. Caleb made it in 20. He pounded on her door until she appeared, already dressed, her bag in hand as if she'd been expecting him. "Clara's time?" "Yes, she woke me about 20 minutes ago." "Then we'd better hurry. First babies can be slow, but you never know." Martha climbed onto her own horse with surprising agility for a woman in her 50s. "Did you boil water?" "Water?" Caleb's mind went blank. "I didn't. I just came straight here." "Never mind. We'll take care of it when we get there. Come on." They rode back to the ranch at a pace that had Caleb's heart hammering. What if something had happened while he was gone? What if Clara needed him and he wasn't there? What if... They burst into the house to find Clara in the kitchen, leaning against the table, breathing hard through a contraction. Annie stood nearby, her face white but determined, one hand on Clara's back. "Good girl," Martha said approvingly to Annie. "You're doing just right. Mr. Rowan, I need you to get that water boiling. Lots of it. Annie, fetch me clean linens, sheets, towels, anything soft and clean. And someone needs to keep the younger children occupied. They don't need to see this." Caleb sprang into action, grateful to have clear tasks. He built up the fire, set multiple pots of water to boil. Annie returned with an armload of linens. Martha had helped Clara upstairs to the bedroom, where she was examining her with professional efficiency. "Everything looks good," Martha announced. "You're doing fine, Clara, but this is going to take a while. First babies usually do." Sam and Rose appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's happening?" Sam asked. "Is Mama Clara sick?" "The baby's coming," Annie explained, taking charge in a way that made Caleb's heart swell with pride. "Come on, let's go outside. We'll look for birds' nests or something." "I want to stay with Mama Clara," Rose protested. "You can see her later," Annie said firmly. "Right now, she needs quiet. Come on." She shepherded her younger siblings out of the house, leaving Caleb and Martha to focus on Clara. The hours that followed were the longest of Caleb's life. Clara's labor progressed slowly, the contractions growing stronger and closer together, but not bringing the baby any nearer to arriving. She walked when she could, leaning on Caleb for support. She tried different positions on Martha's advice. She drank water and honey when Martha insisted she needed energy. By midday, she was exhausted and in real pain. Caleb held her hand through each contraction, feeling utterly helpless as she gripped him with surprising strength. "I can't do this," Clara gasped between pains. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can," Martha said firmly. "You're doing beautifully. The baby's coming down nicely. You're almost there." "You said that an hour ago," Clara said, and there was an edge of hysteria in her voice. "And you're an hour closer than you were then." Martha wiped Clara's forehead with a cool cloth. "Listen to me, Clara. Women have been doing this since Eve. Your body knows what to do. Trust it." Caleb felt completely out of his depth. He'd faced stampeding cattle, broken bones, drought, and financial ruin, but nothing had prepared him for watching his wife in this kind of pain and being unable to do anything to help. "Talk to me," Clara pleaded during a brief respite between contractions. "Distract me. Tell me something." Caleb's mind went blank. "What should I talk about?" "Anything. Tell me about when you were traveling. Tell me about the places you saw." So Caleb talked. He told her about working on a ranch in Montana where the winters were so cold your breath froze in your beard, about driving cattle through New Mexico and seeing mountains that touched the sky, about a summer in Colorado where the wildflowers covered entire meadows in purple and gold. He talked until his voice went hoarse, and Clara clung to his words like a lifeline. Afternoon faded toward evening. The children came in for supper, which Caleb somehow managed to prepare, cold meat and bread, nothing fancy. They ate quietly, casting worried glances toward the ceiling where they could occasionally hear Clara cry out. "Is Mama Clara going to die?" Rose asked suddenly, her voice very small. The question hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. "No," he said firmly. "She's not going to die. Having a baby is hard work, but she's strong. She's going to be fine." "That's what people said about Mama and Papa," Rose said. "But they died anyway." Annie reached over, took Rose's hand. "This is different. Mama Clara has a good doctor. Well, Mrs. Martha. And she's healthy and strong. She's going to be fine. And we're going to have a new brother or sister." "I want a sister," Rose announced. "Boys are loud." "I'm not loud," Sam protested. "You are too. You stomp everywhere like a baby elephant." The normalcy of their bickering was oddly comforting. Caleb got them settled for the evening, though none of them wanted to go to bed. They ended up in the main room, the children eventually falling asleep in a pile on the sofa, while Caleb paced and listened to the sounds from upstairs. As night deepened, Clara's labor intensified. Her cries grew louder, more desperate. Caleb wanted to be with her, but Martha kept sending him away, insisting there was nothing he could do. It was just after midnight when Martha called down the stairs. "Mr. Rowan, I need you up here, now." Caleb took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart in his throat. He burst into the bedroom to find Clara propped up against pillows, her face red and streaked with tears, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. "The baby's crowning," Martha said. "Clara needs something to hold on to. Get over here." Caleb moved to Clara's side. She grabbed his hand with both of hers, her grip crushing. "I can't," she gasped. "Martha, I can't do this anymore." "You don't have a choice, honey. This baby's coming now whether you're ready or not. Next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got. Understand?" Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue. When the next pain hit, she bore down, her face contorting with effort, a low groan coming from deep in her chest. Caleb held her, whispering encouragement, though he had no idea if she could even hear him. "Good," Martha coached. "Good, Clara. Again. One more big push." Clara pushed again, and suddenly Martha was saying, "The head's out." "One more, Clara. Just one more push." Clara found strength from somewhere, pushed one final time, and then there was a different sound in the room. A thin, reedy wail. A baby's cry. "It's a boy," Martha announced, holding up a small, red, squalling creature. "You have a son." Clara collapsed back against the pillows, laughing and crying at the same time. "A boy! We have a boy!" Martha quickly cleaned the baby, wrapped him in a soft cloth, and placed him in Clara's arms. The infant quieted immediately, his unfocused eyes trying to make sense of this new world. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny perfect fingers that curled around Clara's thumb when she touched his hand. "Hello, little one," Clara whispered. "Hello, my baby." Caleb stared at his son, and felt something crack open in his chest. This tiny person, this miracle, was his and Clara's, proof of their love, their future, their hope. "Do you want to hold him?" Clara asked, looking up at Caleb with exhausted joy. With trembling hands, Caleb took the baby. He was so small, so fragile, weighing almost nothing, but he was warm and alive and perfect. The baby's eyes opened briefly, seeming to look directly at Caleb, and in that moment, Caleb fell completely in love. "He needs a name," Clara said softly. They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, holding his son, Caleb knew what the name should be. "Thomas," he said, "for my brother. If that's all right with you." Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thomas? Yes, that's perfect." "Thomas Caleb Rowan," Caleb said, trying out the full name. "Welcome to the world, son." Martha bustled around, cleaning up, making Clara comfortable, checking to make sure everything was as it should be. "You did beautifully," she told Clara. "Both of you did. I'll stay a while longer, make sure you're settled, but everything looks good. You've got a healthy baby boy." After Martha left, promising to return in the morning to check on them, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed with Clara, both of them gazing at the sleeping baby between them. "I was so scared," Clara admitted. "When it was at the worst, I was afraid I wouldn't make it, that you'd be raising this baby alone like you've been raising the others." "Don't," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Don't even think things like that. You're here. You're fine. We're all fine." "We are, aren't we?" Clara touched the baby's soft cheek. "We're a family, a real complete family. We've been a family for months now." "I know, but this feels different somehow, more permanent, like we've built something that nothing can take away." Caleb understood what she meant. The children upstairs were Thomas's, and though Caleb loved them and would raise them as his own, there was always the knowledge that they weren't his by blood. But this baby, Thomas, he was theirs in every possible way, the physical proof that they belonged together. As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the children woke and crept upstairs. They gathered around the bed, staring in awe at the tiny baby. "He's so small," Sam whispered. "All babies are small," Annie said with the authority of someone who'd read every book she could find on the subject. "He'll get bigger." "Can I hold him?" Rose asked. Clara carefully arranged Rose on the bed, supporting her as she placed the baby in Rose's arms. The little girl stared down at her new brother with wonder. "Hello, baby Thomas," she said solemnly. "I'm your sister Rose. I'm going to teach you all kinds of things. How to pick flowers and catch butterflies and make mud pies. It's going to be great." They took turns holding the baby, each child marveling at his tiny features, his soft skin, his perfect little hands. Annie looked at him with a mixture of love and something more complex, perhaps recognition that this baby was Caleb and Clara's in a way she and her siblings never quite were. Caleb caught the look, pulled Annie aside. "You know you're still my first daughter, right? Nothing changes that." "I know," Annie said. "But he's yours for real. Blood yours." "And so are you," Caleb said firmly. "Maybe not by blood, but in every other way that matters. You're mine, Annie, you and Sam and Rose. Thomas being born doesn't change that even a little bit." Annie studied his face, looking for the truth, and must have found it because she relaxed. "Okay, good, because I like being yours, and I like you being mine." The days after Thomas's birth settled into a new rhythm. Clara recovered quickly, much to everyone's relief. The baby was healthy and nursing well. The children adjusted to having an infant in the house, learning to be quiet during his naps, helping in small ways. Caleb found himself enchanted by fatherhood in a way he hadn't expected. With Annie, Sam, and Rose, he'd come into their lives when they were already formed people with personalities and memories. But Thomas he got to know from the very beginning, every expression, Every noise, every tiny change was a wonder. He would hold his son in the early mornings before the rest of the house woke, talking to him about the ranch, about his plans for the future, about his brother Thomas, who the baby was named for. "Your Uncle Thomas was a good man," Caleb told the infant, who stared up at him with unfocused eyes. "Better than me in a lot of ways. He stayed when I ran. He built a life here, had a family, did things right. I hope you turn out more like him than like me." "Don't say that," Clara said from the bed, where she'd been listening. "You're a good man too, Caleb. You stepped up when you were needed. You've given these children a home, a family. That counts for something." "I'm trying," Caleb said. "Every day I'm trying to be the man they need me to be." "You already are." By September, life had found its new balance. The ranch was thriving. Caleb had made the last payment on Thomas's debts to the bank, freeing them from that burden. The cattle were healthy, the harvest from the garden was abundant, the household was running smoothly. One warm evening, Caleb sat on the porch with Clara beside him, baby Thomas asleep in her arms. The other children were playing in the yard, chasing fireflies as dusk settled over the prairie. Their laughter drifted on the evening breeze, a sound that never got old. "Remember when you first came here?" Caleb asked Clara. "That morning you showed up with bread?" "I remember. You looked like you hadn't slept in a week. The kitchen was a disaster. The children were miserable." Clara smiled. "I almost turned around and went home. You seemed so determined to do everything yourself." "Pride," Caleb admitted. "Stupid pride. If you'd turned around, I don't know what would have happened to us." "You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe, but it would have taken a lot longer, and it wouldn't have turned out nearly this well." Caleb took Clara's free hand, laced his fingers through hers. "You saved us, Clara. All of us." "We saved each other," Clara corrected. "I was lonely, convinced I'd never have a family of my own. Then you appeared with 3 children who needed someone and a heart big enough to let someone in, even though you'd just lost your brother. We both got something we needed." Baby Thomas stirred, making small noises. Clara adjusted him and he settled again, his tiny hand curled against her chest. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked after a moment of comfortable silence. "About how much has changed in less than a year. About how different my life is now compared to what I thought it would be." Caleb paused, gathering his thoughts. "I used to think freedom was the most important thing. Being able to go where I wanted, when I wanted, answering to no one. Now I'm tied to this place, responsible for 5 other people, and I've never felt freer in my life." "That's because this is where you belong," Clara said simply. "This ranch, this family, it was always where you were supposed to end up. You just took the long way getting here." Annie ran up onto the porch, breathless and glowing. "Uncle Caleb, can we have a bonfire? Please? It's perfect weather for it." "I don't see why not. Sam, Rose, come help me gather wood." They built a fire in the clearing near the house, a safe distance from anything that could catch. As the flames grew, casting dancing shadows, the family gathered around it. Caleb told stories about his adventures before coming back to redemption, about Thomas when they were boys, about the ranch and the land and the dreams he had for the future. Clara sang songs, her voice sweet in the darkness. The children toasted bread on sticks, getting more charcoal than toast, but laughing the whole time. Baby Thomas slept through it all, occasionally making small sounds that reminded them of his presence. As the fire burned down to embers and the children's eyes grew heavy, Caleb looked around at his family. Annie, growing so fast, already showing signs of the woman she'd become. Sam, still young, but taking on more responsibility every day. Rose, no longer the scared little girl who'd lost her parents, but a confident child who knew she was loved. Clara, his wife, his partner, his miracle. And Thomas, their son, the future made flesh. This was what mattered, not the ranch, not the cattle, not the land, though those were important. But this, these people, this love that had grown from tragedy and loss into something beautiful and strong. "Time for bed," Clara announced finally. Even on special nights, children need sleep. There were token protests, but no real resistance. The children were exhausted from the day's activities. They trudged inside, got ready for bed with the efficiency of long practice. Caleb made the rounds, tucking each child in, listening to their prayers, answering their last-minute questions. When he reached Annie's room, she was already under her covers, but clearly not ready to sleep. "Uncle Caleb, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Mama and Papa would be happy with how things turned out?" It was a question she'd asked before in different ways, and Caleb suspected she'd keep asking it as she grew older, needing reassurance that loving her new life didn't mean forgetting her old one. "I think they'd be very happy," Caleb said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "They loved you kids more than anything. All they ever wanted was for you to be safe and loved and happy. You are all those things now. That's what they would have wanted." "I still miss them sometimes." "That's good. You should miss them. They were your parents, and they loved you. Missing them means you haven't forgotten them, and you should never forget them." Caleb brushed her hair back from her forehead. "But missing them doesn't mean you can't also love the life you have now. Both things can be true at the same time." Annie considered this, then nodded. "I love Mama Clara, and baby Thomas, and you. Is that okay?" "More than okay. That's exactly how it should be." "Good." Annie yawned. "Uncle Caleb, I think maybe I want to call you Papa, if that's still all right." Caleb's throat went tight. "That would be more than all right. That would make me very happy." "Okay. Good night, Papa." "Good night, Annie." He left her room with tears in his eyes, overwhelmed by the simple gift of that word. Papa. He was Papa now. Not just Uncle Caleb trying his best, but Papa. Father to 4 children, husband to a woman he loved beyond reason, owner of a ranch that was finally beginning to thrive. Downstairs, he found Clara in the rocking chair by the window, nursing Thomas. She looked up when Caleb entered, smiled at whatever she saw in his face. "Annie?" she guessed. "She called me Papa." "Oh, Caleb." Clara's own eyes grew misty. "That's wonderful." He knelt beside the rocking chair, put his hand on Thomas's small back, felt the rise and fall of his breathing. "I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. I thought I'd be a drifter my whole life, never putting down roots, never belonging anywhere. And now? Now you're home," Clara finished. "We're all home." Caleb looked up at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life at exactly the right moment, carrying bread and hope and a future he hadn't known he needed. "Thank you," he said simply. "For everything. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. For loving my brother's children like they were your own. For giving me Thomas. For making this house a home." "Thank you for letting me," Clara replied. "For opening your heart when you had every reason to keep it closed. For trusting me with your family. For loving me." Thomas finished nursing and fell asleep against Clara's chest. She stood carefully, Caleb rising with her, and together they carried their son upstairs to the cradle beside their bed. They laid him down gently, covered him with the quilt Mrs. Cooper had made, and stood together watching him sleep. "He looks like you," Clara whispered. "He has your nose." "That's unfortunate for him." Caleb laughed softly, pulled her into his arms. "Your nose is perfect. Everything about you is perfect." They stood there in the quiet darkness, holding each other, listening to their son's soft breathing, knowing that 3 other children slept safely down the hall. The house was full of life and love and possibility. The ranch was prospering. The future stretched out bright and full of promise. Outside, the stars wheeled across the vast Texas sky, the same stars that had watched Thomas and Mary build their life here, that had seen Caleb arrive grief-stricken